My name's Stanley, and I clean up the worst days of people's lives. Some folks paint, others write. I scrub blood off walls. It's an art form in its own right, if you squint hard enough. Today's masterpiece, the 711 downtown site of a robbery turned shootout. I'd seen it all before, but that didn't make it any easier. There's something about the silence of an empty crime scene that speaks louder than any scream. I still remember my first cleanup job. It was a small house on the outskirts of town, picture perfect on the outside, but the inside was a nightmare. A family dinner gone horribly wrong. Dad had a psychotic break and put some rat poison in the casserole. I spent 3 days getting to know them as I cleaned. By the time I was done, the house was spotless. Blank slate. If only wiping away their pain was as easy. You see, this job, it gets to you. Not just the sights, but the stories left untold. But someone's got to do it, right? Might as well be me. Mopping up the floors, I couldn't help but feel for the victims. They were just people caught in the crossfire of someone else's greed. I worked carefully, trying not to think too much about the why. Instead, I thought about how to make it look like nothing bad ever happened here. As I was packing up my gear, I heard my phone buzz. I glanced at the screen. It was Officer Simmons, my contact at the police department. The voice on the other end was grave. "Stanley, we need you at another scene." The way he said another scene made my stomach drop. This wasn't going to be just another day at the office. I sighed, mentally preparing myself for what was to come. Address Simmons. As I jotted down the details, I couldn't shake the feeling that this job was going to be different. Simmons said it looked like a homicide. An old man had been renting the place all by himself. He was found sprawled on the living room floor by the girl who delivered his weekly groceries. When I rolled up to the address, the place already felt off. It was one of those old houses that looked like it could use a friend, all worn out and lonely. Paint had chipped off the front in large patches. The door hung open. Forced open by first responders, bright yellow police tape lay on the porch in tatters. I wiped down my boots before stepping inside. My cleaning kit suddenly felt heavy in my hand. The front door opened up to a huge living room. It seemed to stretch all the way to the back of the house, and the place was in total chaos. Chairs with broken legs had been knocked all over. The couch was sticking out of a hole in the wall, stuffing torn out. Glass shards covered the wooden floor. In the middle of it all was a single chalk outline where the body was found. But it wasn't just the mess that bothered me. It was the blood. Most of it was in places it had no business being on. Smeared on the ceiling, like someone painted it on there. Spatters, were normal, but this looked deliberate. And then there was the smell. It wasn't just the iron tang of blood. There was something else mixed in with it. Something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It smelled like lavender with a hint of vanilla. Exactly like my mom's old perfume. Pulling on my gloves, I tried to focus on the job ahead. The messed up furniture and the stains were all part of the gig. But that perfume, it had no business smelling as strong as it did. Mom disappeared just before my 18th birthday. Not left or died, just vanished like a puff of smoke. She cleaned houses too, but she was more like your usual maid service. She went around in a beat-up Toyota, her trunk full of cleaning supplies. Her regulars were mostly lonely old folks around town. She had a gift of making anyone feel like family. The job didn't pay much, but it was enough for the two of us. Then one day, she just never came home. Her planner said that she was hired by a new client that day, but when police checked out the address, all they found was an empty lot. Her minivan was found in a nearby ditch. The only trace of her left were tiny specks of blood on the seat, like she just cut her finger. Nothing was stolen, not even a cash box. The cops never found out what exactly happened to her, but that's why I only take referrals. I started to sweep up the glass. As I moved through the room, the sweet floral smell seemed to get stronger. It was crazy. I know. How could it be stronger than all the blood smeared around? But every whiff of it was like a punch to the gut. It dragged up memories I thought I'd buried deep. Mom was the one who taught me to clean, to find order in the chaos. She'd say, "Stanley, life's a mess, but at least we can clean up our corners of it." Funny, I used to roll my eyes at that. Now here I was, trying to make sense of a crazy, messed up world. I rubbed my temples, trying to concentrate on the job. It took me an hour just to clean up the broken shards. In the end, I filled up 4 industrial-grade garbage bags of the stuff. Couldn't even tell you what they were originally supposed to be. Next came the blood on the ceiling. Now, ceiling, it's not exactly my favorite. Gravity's not on your side, and neck aches, they're a guarantee. As I set up the ladder, I couldn't help but squint at the smears above. I climbed up, sponge in hand, and took a closer look. Now I've seen my fair share of blood splatters, but these were weird. Some were blobs that ended in straight edges, like something cut through them, and that's where it hit me. These weren't random. They formed a pattern, deliberate and precise. It almost looked like some sort of symbol, but not one I recognized. It was too organized, too intentional. I paused, sponge hovering in midair, as I tried to make sense of it. This wasn't the kind of thing you'd expect to find at a crime scene, not even in the weirdest of cases I've cleaned up. I've seen my share of messes, but symbols drawn in blood on a ceiling, that was new. I shook my head, trying to clear it. "You're seeing things, Stan," I told myself. "It's just a messy crime scene, nothing more." But even as I said it, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this pattern, something important. It was as if whoever left it there. I wanted it to be seen, that it's something to be understood. With a sigh, I started scrubbing, but my eyes would drift over everything. I kept finding patterns in the swirls and blobs, and as I began wiping, each swipe of the sponge revealed another layer beneath. The symbols changed right before my eyes, taking shape with every bit of blood I tried to remove. It was like peeling an onion, each layer uncovering something new. The more I cleaned, the more it seemed to grow in detail. The stains sprouted new lines and curves. They twisted and turned in ways that made my head spin. I stepped down from the ladder for a second. I needed a breather to wrap my head around what I was seeing. "This doesn't make any sense," I mumbled to myself. Climbing back up, I gave it another go, but with each wipe, the symbol seemed to dig its heels in, refusing to be erased. If anything, it looked clearer. The lines looked smoother. The curving loops were more pronounced. Its design was now etched firmly into the ceiling, as if it was meant to be there all along. I worked at it until my arms ached and my sponge was falling apart, but the stains were stubborn. They clung to the ceiling like they were part of the house itself. "Fine, have it your way," I grumbled. I decided I'd bring the big guns tomorrow, some heavy-duty cleaners that could wipe clean any sins of the past. With the day turning into night, I packed up my stuff. I gave the blood one last look. It almost seemed to stare back. "I'll be back for you." I muttered more to myself than anything else. Once home, curiosity got the best of me. That pattern, the house, my mother's perfume. I couldn't let any of it go. I usually don't ask for any details about the scenes I clean up, not like the cops would tell me anything anyway. By the time I get called, the cases are still under investigation. So I fired up my old laptop and I started digging into the house itself. It turns out that the place had a knack for catching fire. It burned down 3 times in the past 35 years alone. Each time it did, it brought down at least one person with it. The family servants the first time, a young couple the next time, the last fire. It took some old lady and her grandkids. But I couldn't find anything about who keeps rebuilding the damn place, or anything about the old man whose blood I was now cleaning up. That blood. I couldn't shake off the symbols it formed on the ceiling. I needed to at least try to find out what they were. At first, it was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Symbols, cult signs, ancient scripts. I fell down a rabbit hole of conspiracies and urban legends, but then I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. I found an old HTML forum talking about summoning rituals. One of the commenters posted a grainy image from some book. The passage under it linked to doorways. Doorways to what the article didn't say. But it was enough to get my mind racing. I looked into whoever posted that image and I came up with an error page. I searched up legends about doorways and at some point what lavender had to do with it. I was always on the lookout for those symbols. And the more I looked into this, the more I felt like I was going nuts. It was like the air around me had changed. My coffee would go from steaming hot to ice cold in a matter of seconds. The shadows in my apartment seemed to move just at the edge of my vision. I looked up, and for a moment it felt like the walls were breathing. It sounds crazy, I know. I thought maybe I was just overworked, or that I need to get my carbon monoxide alarm checked. But as I looked around my apartment, I found more things out of place. Books I swore I left on the table were now on the floor. The pictures on the walls hung at odd angles. I thought I saw maggots crawling from the vents, and every now and then I'd catch a whiff of lavender and vanilla. It started filling the room like she was right there with me. The smell seemed to swirl around me, especially when I found something new about the symbol. It was like each piece of information I uncovered brought with it a gust of that familiar scent. Doorways, Mom's perfume, her disappearance, this job. Was it all connected? I was gagging on the scent by now, so I shut my laptop, opened up a window, and lit a cigarette. It was amazing how much that helped. I breathed in deep, reveling in the familiar tobacco scent. Now this is something that made more sense. This was the real world. By the time I finished my smoke, I was just about to collapse on my feet. It's been a long day, and I've still got a job to finish. When I woke up, the first rays of morning light were peeking through the blinds. The floral scent was gone. I poured myself a strong black coffee, determined to finish what I started. I had to go back to that house, to the crime scene. I had to clean up those bloodstains, not just for the sake of my job, but to prove to myself that I wasn't losing my grip on reality. Armed with my biggest bottle of bleach and my best PPE, I drove back to the bloodhouse. The morning air was crisp. It was a stark contrast to the heavy atmosphere of the night before. As I parked my van outside the house, I took a deep breath. I knew something was wrong with that house, and whatever it is, it's already followed me home. So I need to do what I do best, clean up other people's messes. As I stepped back into the house, the stillness was suffocating. I left the door open, stuffing a rag under it to get some air in. That barely helped. I brought in everything I'd need and set up my ladder under the biggest splotch. Climbing up, I braced for the work ahead. The stains looked even less natural than yesterday. Tendrils curled around each other. Rigid slashes cut across loops. Pinpricks of blood formed strange patterns. But then, as I started to work, that scent filled the air again. Vanilla and lavender. So distinct, so full of memories. At first it was just a hint, a whisper that made me pause mid-scrub. But it didn't stop there. It grew stronger, richer. It drowned out the harsh chemical smell of the cleaners and the metallic scent of the blood. I tried to shake it off, but it was disorienting. The familiar comfort of the scent clashed with the whole reality of where I was and what I was doing. And the more I tried to clean, the more the blood resisted. Now I could almost swear that the blood moved away from my sponge, just moving away every time I swiped over it, as if the house, the symbol, and even the perfume was telling me that some stains weren't meant to be scrubbed away. My heart was racing. I needed to catch my breath. I stepped down from the ladder. I needed to make sense of what was happening, I thought. But as my feet hit the floor, I realized that the room itself had changed. I was sure that I'd swept up all the glass yesterday, and the floor was spotless when I came in this morning. Yet there they were, shards covering the floor, glinting much brighter than they should. I don't know how, but I just knew these were the exact same pieces of glass I'd thrown away yesterday. And through all this, the floral scent grew stronger. It filled the room. It took over the stale air, and it made it hard to think about anything else. The sunlight that streamed into the room seemed weaker now, too. It wasn't until I looked around that I realized why. When I entered, there were 3 windows, 2 on the back wall, 1 by the front door. Now there was only 1. Thick metal bars ran across it, blocking out even more sunlight. I could feel nausea setting in the room itself. It felt like it was shrinking. The walls seemed to inch closer whenever I looked away, yet the door outside, it seemed to recede further and further away. And there was that scent, that sweet vanilla and lavender. It was so intense, it was almost as if she was standing right behind me. Everything felt wrong, deeply wrong. The room. It wasn't just a room anymore. It was a trap, closing in on me with every breath I took. I can understand now why someone would burn this place down over and over again. This is a place that shouldn't exist. I tried to make my way to the door, keeping my eyes down. I had to block everything out except putting one foot in front of the other. Right foot, left foot, one at a time. Nice and easy, Stanley. But that's when I saw it. The chalk outline where the body had been found. Clear as day. Except it wasn't where it was supposed to be. I swear it was further back into the room, but now I could see the edge of its hand almost touching my boot. I blinked hard. Sure, my eyes were playing tricks on me. But no, there it was, a good few feet away from its original spot. My stomach knotted up at the sight. Chalk outlines don't move. Everybody knows that. They're drawn around where things are, where people end up. I squeezed shut now. I willed my racing heart to slow down, but the moment I opened my eyes, a jolt of fear went through me. The chalk outline's arms had moved again. Both of its arms, they looked like they were reaching for me now, and they were much longer than what a human should be. I jumped back, and that's when I saw another one. Another chalk outline had appeared. It was standing upright on the wall next to me. I tried to run, but the scent of my mother's perfume, I don't know. It overwhelmed everything. It was so strong now. It was like she was right there in the room with me. It was too much. My legs gave out. I found myself on the floor, my hands bracing against the wood beneath me. The floorboards moved under my touch. They were warm like flesh, and they rippled from around me like water in a pond. The room started to pulse with a silent, unseen heartbeat, lying there on the floor. I felt the room's pulse quicken. The boards grew softer and hotter. The walls closed in on me, contracting like a throat. And then I heard something. It was a whisper, soft and gentle, as it floated through the heavy air. My heart skipped a beat when I realized it was her voice. Mom's voice, as clear and comforting as if she were sitting right beside me. "Stay here with me, Stanley," she whispered. "Stay in this room forever." God, I missed her. It was just the two of us when I was growing up. Always had been. A part of me wanted nothing more than to just listen. To finally rest in her lap again, like when I was a little kid. But another part of me, the rational part, screamed that this was wrong. You don't have to leave, Stanley. We can be together forever, just like you always wanted. The voice continued. But you disappeared. They never found you, I managed to say. My voice broke with a mix of heartache and disbelief. I know, sweetheart, and I'm so sorry. I didn't want to leave you, but we have our chance now. A chance to be together. Isn't that what you've always wanted? Images of my childhood flashed in my mind, almost against my will. It made it hard to think, to resist. I remembered the weekends in the kitchen, baking cookies with her. She'd laugh as I made a mess with the flour. She never got mad at other people's messes. It was a part of life, she said. It's not a real cookie unless you wear some of the ingredients. And then there were the nights she'd tuck me in after a late night call. I'd be asleep on the couch, waiting for her to come home. I'd wake up to her scent as she carried me to my room. That always made me feel so safe, so loved. Tears blurred my vision, as those memories filled me with a warmth that I hadn't felt in years. "I miss you so much," I said, "and you don't have to miss me anymore." "Stay, Stanley. Stay with me," she urged, but there was a hint of desperation in her voice. "But Mom, this isn't right." Now, my mom, she was a cleaner just like me. Worked her fingers to the bone in houses much like this one, always dreaming of a better future for us. She saved every penny she could, hoping I'd find my own path. Remembering her sacrifices and hopes for me, I realized the real Hermie, real mom would never want me stuck here, trapped in a room full of ghosts. She wanted me to live, I said out loud, the words slicing through the thick air. Holding on to that thought gave me the strength to get back to my feet. My mom gave me a life to live, that I wasn't about to waste it. As I moved towards the door, the voice grew louder. My mother's perfume grew sharper now. The lavender turned into something sharp and acidic. The vanilla took on a rotting smell. Gagged. It didn't make me feel warm anymore. Of everything that happened, that's what really pissed me off. The way this house poisoned those memories, it was like it turned them inside out. It was as if the room was throwing everything it had at me, desperate to make me stay. And with it came a flood of memories. They were so vivid and detailed, glimpses into a life that could have been. I saw my mom standing next to me, her eyes gleaming as we admired my own cleaning bin. It was shiny and new, with my business name painted on the side. "You did it, Stanley," she said in my vision. Her voice was filled with so much pride, it made my heart swell. "You made something amazing." Then I saw a wedding. My wedding. I never married, never had a wife. But I saw my mom sitting in the front row, tears streaming down her cheeks as she watched me say, "I do" her happiness. It was palpable. It radiated through the room, making everyone else cry too. She came up to me afterward, hugging me tight. And then the most heart-wrenching vision of all was her in the kitchen. She was surrounded by laughter and the sweet smell of baking cookies. My kids, her grandkids, were there with her, covered in flour, their faces lit up with joy. She was teaching them how to bake, just like she taught me, telling them that it's never a mistake to make a mess. These visions, these could-have-beens, they hit me hard. But out of the corner of my eye, the room continued to heave. More chalk figures had appeared around the room. Some looked like they were crawling on the floor. Others stretched across the walls, reaching for me. They all moved closer. I was afraid then. Desperation clawed at my insides. I needed to do something, anything, to break this spell, to bring myself back to the here and now. In a move that felt more instinct than thought, I grabbed the bottle of bleach nearby. Without hesitating, I unscrewed the cap and I poured it over my clothes. The liquid was cold and shocking against my skin. The bleach's harsh stench cut through the sweet perfume. It burned my nose and it made my eyes water, but it was enough to clear my head. I splashed bleach on the ceiling. Its chemical smell filled the room. The blood began to sizzle and fade. The symbols shivered and gave off a faint glow before they disappeared. It stung my skin where it soaked through my clothes. But I didn't care. It was a reminder that I was alive, that I was still real. The undeniable pain. It was exactly what I needed. I used the last of the bleach against the walls, and with each splash, the figures on the walls recoiled and melted away. With a final exhale, I made a break for it. I bolted towards the door, my legs pumping as fast as they could. I didn't stop until I was past the threshold. The moment I was outside, fresh air hit me like a wave. I ran towards my van, dropping safety gear along the way. But my relief was short-lived. My body had been pushed to its limits. I collapsed to the ground. The cool earth felt good on my skin. As my consciousness slipped away, my vision blurred. And that's when I saw her, my real mother. She stood over me, a soft, proud smile on her face, as if to say she knew I'd make it, that I'd beat whatever got her. The last thing I saw was her leaning down to kiss my forehead. Waking up felt like crawling out of a deep, dark hole. My eyes blinked open. To the sterile white of a hospital room, the beeping machines next to me cut through the silence. My head was pounding, and my throat felt raw. My arms were covered in bandages. Some of my friends came by the afternoon I woke up. They said I'd been unconscious for 2 days. Some jogger found me passed out by my van. Nothing was stolen, but I was covered in some very bad chemical burns. Simmons asked me if I was okay. Asked me if I wanted to go fishing as soon as I was discharged. I guess they all thought I had some sort of breakdown. I guess I kind of did. I waved it off. What the hell happened at that blood house, Simmons? Who was the old man who died there? I demanded. What do you mean, Stan? What house? He replied, the one you sent me to. I only ended up at that damn place because you called me in for a job. Simmons shook his head at that. Stan, I haven't called you for any job since 711, and we found you in an empty lot. There's no houses anywhere near there. Never has been. My name is Jack. I'm 24, and I make my living crawling around in the dark. You could call me a caver, but it's not just a job for me. It's an obsession. I guide tourists through winding tunnels and squeeze them through tight spaces they didn't think they could fit into. They pay me to teach them how to conquer their fears. But truth be told, I'm not much braver than anyone else. I've just learned to shove fear into a corner and ignore it. Most of the time, I got into caving by accident. When I was a kid, my family visited a cavern on vacation. It was one of those big tourist attractions with paved paths and handrails. The kind of place they light up with colored bulbs and make it look pretty. I was 10, but even back then, I wanted more, I remember asking the guide where the tunnels went. And he said, "Know where you want to go, kid." That stuck with me. I decided I did want to go wherever those tunnels led. A few years later, I convinced my dad to take me to a local caving club meeting. Those guys, grizzled old men with beards, calloused hands, and stories about getting stuck for hours in passages no wider than your shoulders. They were my heroes by the time I was 18. I spent every weekend underground. I'd crawl into places so tight you couldn't even lift your head. I'd come home with bruises on my ribs and mud in places mud should never be, and I'd call it a good time. My mom thought I was crazy. My dad just said it was better than sitting in front of a screen all day. Now, caving is my life. I work for a company that runs tours and a massive cave system. I know every twist and turn like the back of my hand. I've memorized the names of every stalactite and every flowstone formation. On weekends, though, I go rogue. No guided tours, no safety rails. Just me, my helmet, and my headlamp, looking for the places no one else has been brave or dumb enough to go. There's something about the unknown that pulls me in. A dark, uncharted passage is like a mystery waiting to be solved. I'll crawl through 100 feet of mud just to see what's on the other side. And sometimes, it's nothing more than rock. But other times, it is a cavern so beautiful. Take your breath away. That's the high I'm always chasing. This weekend, I decided to check out a new area. I'd heard rumors about a cave system in the woods about an hour's drive from town. It wasn't on any maps, and nobody seemed to know much about it. And that was all the invitation I needed. I packed my gear, helmet, ropes, flashlight, extra batteries, snacks, and set out early Saturday morning. The trailhead wasn't marked, but I'd found a vague description of how to get there in an old forum post. Follow the creek until you see a rock shaped like a bear's head, it said. The entrance is just past that. The hike was peaceful at first. The woods were quiet except for the crunch of leaves under my boots and the occasional chirp of a bird. The air smelled like damp earth and pine. I found the bear-shaped rock just where the post said it would be. It did look like a bear in a lopsided sort of way. With moss growing over its ears just beyond it, I spotted the entrance. It was a jagged hole in the side of a limestone bluff, half hidden by ferns. The opening was barely wide enough to crawl through. Perfect. I pulled out my flashlight and shone it into the darkness. The beam disappeared into a black void. My pulse quickened. This was it. An unexplored cave. Maybe nobody had ever set foot inside. I mean, that's not possible, right? But anyway, I slid into the opening on my stomach, wriggling forward like a snake. The rock scraped against my jacket, but I didn't mind. This was the part one loved, the feeling of being swallowed by the earth, of leaving the world behind as the light from the entrance faded. I felt that familiar mix of excitement and unease. What lay ahead? I had no idea. Now, the first chamber wasn't much to look at. A low-ceilinged room with rough walls and a floor covered in loose rocks. I crouched and scanned the space with my flashlight. There were two passages leading out. One was narrow and sloped upward. The other was wide enough to walk through. But I plunged steeply into the depths. I chose the steep one. As I descended, the air grew cooler and heavier. My breath echoed in a confined space. The walls seemed to close in around me, and I had to duck to avoid scraping my helmet. I kept going deeper and deeper, and that's when I saw the first sign that something wasn't right. It was a wooden box, just lying there on the cave floor, like someone had left it behind. At first, I thought it was just an old toolbox, or maybe part of some abandoned mining equipment. But when I crouched down to take a closer look, my flashlight caught the sharp edges of nails hammered into the corners. It wasn't a box, it was a coffin. I froze. My brain scrambled for a rational explanation. This had to be a prank, right? Some weird macabre joke left by other cavers to freak out anybody who wandered in here. I laughed nervously, but the sound felt out of place in the stillness. My laughter faded, swallowed by the oppressive silence of the cave. I stood there for a while, trying to decide what to do. Eventually, curiosity won out. I stepped closer and swept my flashlight over it, and that's when I saw them. 3 more coffins arranged in a neat little row, all identical, all eerily pristine. Considering the damp, muddy environment, they were spaced evenly apart, like someone had carefully measured the distance between them. What the hell? I muttered to myself, the sound of my own voice making me feel a little less alone. My chest tightened and a cold knot of unease began to form in my stomach. This couldn't be real. Who would drag coffins down here and why? I stepped closer to the first one, my boots crunching on the gravelly floor. It was just a plain wooden box, unvarnished. The wood looked old but not rotted, which didn't make sense. In this damp environment, anything organic should have decayed long ago. My hand hovered over the lid, hesitating. Every rational part of me screamed to leave it alone, to turn around and get the hell out of here, but the pull of curiosity was too strong. Slowly, I gripped the edge and lifted. The lid creaked open, and the smell hit me first, a faint, musty odor like dirt. My flashlight beam trembled as I aimed it inside. A child, a little boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old. His skin was pale, and his hair was a dusty blonde. He was dressed in what looked like old-fashioned clothes, a button-up shirt and suspenders, the kind of thing you'd see in a black and white photo. His hands were folded neatly over his chest, clutching a small wooden toy. I slammed the lid shut and stumbled backward, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. Maybe it was a dummy. Some elaborate props to scare explorers. Yeah, that had to be it. I just needed to prove it to myself. I forced myself to move to the next coffin, the unease in my stomach now clawing at my insides. The second one was slightly larger. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside was a little girl, no older than 10. She was dressed in a lacy white dress, the kind you'd wear to a wedding or a funeral. Her dark hair was braided neatly over one shoulder, and her hands were clasped around a small porcelain doll. Her eyes were closed, and her face looked so peaceful, like she was just sleeping. But there was no rise and fall of her chest, no warmth to her skin. I backed away again, my flashlight flickering as if it was reacting to the growing panic inside me. My brain screamed for me to leave, to abandon this nightmare and run back to the surface, but something kept me rooted there. Maybe it was the need to understand, or maybe I was just too scared to move. The third coffin was even larger. This one had to hold an adult. I hesitated. Every part of me begged to stop, but I leaned forward and lifted the lid. A man, mid-30s, maybe 40. He had sharp features, high cheekbones. He wore a dark suit that was slightly frayed at the edges. His hands were clasped over his stomach, and his skin was just as pale as the children's. The fourth coffin was identical in size, and I already knew what I'd find before I opened it. Sure enough, inside was a woman, likely in her 30s. She was beautiful, with long dark hair and a serene expression. She wore a simple dress, the fabric worn but clean. Her hands held a small bouquet of dried flowers. A family, 2 parents, 2 children lying here in this dark, forgotten cave, as if they belonged here. I staggered back and pressed myself against the wall. My breathing comes in short, ragged gasps. My flashlight trembled in my hand, causing jittery shadows across the walls. I didn't know what to think, what to believe. Who were they? How long had they been here, and why? I crouched down, trying to steady my breathing, when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Carved into the rock wall above the coffins was a message etched in jagged, uneven letters. "We wait for the light." The words sent a chill down my spine. They didn't make sense, but something about them felt final. I stood there for a long time, staring at the coffins. The message, the family frozen in time. A million questions raced through my mind, but I had no answers. I stood frozen, my flashlight beam trembling against the jagged letters carved into the wall. The silence pressed against me, and then the air shifted. It wasn't a sound exactly, more like a vibration, a faint stirring. I turned back towards the coffins, and the lids were moving. It was subtle at first, a faint creak of wood that could almost be mistaken for the groaning of the cave itself. But then the lids slid open one by one, as if something inside was pushing them aside. My legs locked in place, my breath caught in my throat. The man sat up quickly, very quickly. It scared the hell out of me. His pale face turned toward the woman, who was rising in a slower manner. The children followed, their small, frail forms unfolding like marionettes. None of them spoke, but their heads swiveled in unison, their empty, unblinking gazes scanning the cavern. I dove behind a cluster of rocks, barely daring to breathe. My flashlight was still on, and its faint glow threatened to give me away. I fumbled to switch it off, plunging myself into darkness again. My pulse pounded in my ears as I pressed my back against the cold, damp stone, trying to make myself as small as possible. "Do you smell that?" A voice broke the silence. Smooth and cold as the cave walls, it was the man. His voice echoed strangely, like it didn't quite belong in this world. "Yes," the woman replied. Her tone was softer, almost sing-song, but it carried an edge that made my skin crawl. Something fresh, warm pause. "A man," one of the children said. "He's close." I clenched my teeth to keep from gasping. My hand crept to my mouth, covering it to stifle the sound of my panicked breathing. The sound of shifting movements filled the cavern as the family climbed out of their coffins. Their footsteps were deliberate but eerily soft, like they barely touched the ground. I dared to peek out from behind the rock just for a second. The faint glow of their pale skin was the only thing visible in the darkness, like a ghost gliding across the cavern floor. "He must be near the entrance," the man said. "We should block it. He'll come to us when there's no other way." Cold dread hit me. That was my escape route. I waited, barely breathing, as the sound of their movements grew distant. I imagined them stacking rocks, dragging debris to seal me in, their pale faces set with grim determination. My heart sank. They were cutting me off from the world above, trapping me here in the darkness. For a long moment, I didn't move. I couldn't. My mind was racing, trying to process what I'd just seen and heard. None of it made sense. People don't just wake up from coffins. They don't sit up like that, don't smell their prey. And yet here I was. I needed to think, to plan, but my thoughts were scrambled by sheer terror. The only clear thing was that I couldn't go back the way I came. I'd have to go deeper, find another exit, if one even existed. I gritted my teeth and turned my flashlight back on, angling the beam low to avoid giving away my position. The light flickered as though the batteries were struggling, but it held steady enough to guide me forward. I crept into one of the narrower tunnels leading away from the main chamber, each step feeling like I was plunging deeper into a nightmare. The tunnel was tight, forcing me to crouch and sometimes crawl on all fours. The rock pressed in around me, and the air grew heavier with each passing moment. Every sound was amplified. The scrape of my boots, the rasp of my breath, the faint drip of water somewhere in the distance. I tried not to think about the family, about their pale faces and their haunting voices, but their words echoed in my mind. "Do you smell food?" they'd asked. I shuddered. I didn't dare look back. The idea of seeing one of them creeping after me, their glowing faces appearing out of the dark, it was too much. The tunnel twisted and turned, sometimes widening into small chambers, other times narrowing, to the point where I had to squeeze through on my stomach. I lost all sense of direction. The further I went, the more disoriented I became every now and then. I thought I heard faint voices behind me, carried by the twisting passages. He can't go far. He'll tire soon. I shook my head, trying to block him out. They couldn't know where I was, just my mind playing tricks on me. That's what I told myself anyway. After what felt like hours, I stumbled into a larger chamber. The air was thicker here, and the smell of damp earth was overpowered by something else. Blood. My flashlight lit up the space, revealing a gruesome sight. Bones, piles of them, scattered across the floor like discarded trash. Some were old, yellowed, and brittle, while others looked disturbingly fresh. With scrapes of flesh still clinging to them, my stomach lurched and I gagged, clapping a hand over my mouth to stop from retching. This was their lair, their feeding ground. I was not the first person trapped down here, and I wouldn't be the last. A faint sound made me freeze footsteps. Soft, deliberate, coming from the tunnel I just crawled through. I killed my flashlight and pressed myself against the wall, blending into the darkness as best I could. My heart thundered in my chest, so loud I was sure they'd hear it. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by the faint sound of breathing. A low, raspy inhale, followed by an exhale. That almost sounded like a sigh. Close. The man's voice murmured so quiet it was almost a whisper. He's close. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I pressed my back against a cold rock, willing myself to disappear into the darkness. The footsteps stopped for a moment. There was nothing but silence, and then a soft chuckle. You can't hide forever. The sound of their footsteps faded as they moved deeper into the tunnels, searching. I stayed where I was, too terrified to move. My mind raced, desperate for a plan. But all I could think about was the growing certainty that I was not getting out of here alive. The footsteps faded, but I didn't dare move. My back was pressed so hard against the jagged wall that I could feel the uneven rock digging into my spine. My breaths were shallow, measured, and quiet. The kind you take when you know any sound could give you away. Somewhere in the distance, I thought I heard faint whispers, like the family was speaking to one another, but their words were impossible to make out. I had to keep going. Sitting here would only delay the inevitable, and I didn't like my odds if they came back this way. Turning on my flashlight as dimly as possible, I scanned the chamber. The bones scattered across the floor gleamed dully in a faint light, each one a silent warning. Leave if you can. I pushed forward, crawling into the next passage, which was narrower and steeper than the last. The walls seemed to press against me more tightly now, like the cave itself was conspiring to trap me. My hands slipped on the damp rock, and my legs ached as I scrambled deeper into the earth, further from anything that felt remotely safe. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to turn around, to go back, but I couldn't. Not with them somewhere behind me, their pale faces and those dead, unblinking eyes. As I crawled, I started hearing things again. Faint sounds, a soft chuckle, the scrape of movement echoing down the tunnel. They were close. Come back, the man called. You'll only make this harder. I gritted my teeth and kept moving. My palms stung from scraping against sharp edges, but I didn't care. Pain was better than stopping, better than being caught. Another voice, the woman's this time, drifted toward me. You're only tiring yourself out, dear. It won't help. It felt like the air around me grew colder the deeper I went. The passage opened into another chamber. But it wasn't a relief I felt. It was dreadful, because the chamber wasn't empty. They were there, the family, all four of them, standing perfectly still, their pale faces turned toward the tunnel I just crawled out of. My breath caught in my throat as I scrambled backward, but it was too late. Their heads snapped in unison, their unblinking eyes locking onto mine. There you are, the man said, his lips curling into a slow smile. I didn't think so. I just ran. The tunnel was tighter now, my shoulders scraping against the walls as I stumbled forward. The air smelled sour, like rot, and every breath burned in my chest behind me. I could hear them moving, not running or chasing, just walking. Their footsteps were deliberate, unhurried, as if they knew I had nowhere to go. You're going the wrong way, the little boy said, his voice echoing unnaturally through the passage. There's nothing for you down there. I ignored him, pressing forward even as the passage grew steeper, more jagged. My flashlight flickered again, and I smacked it against my palm, muttering a desperate curse. The beam steadied, but I knew it wouldn't last much longer. The sound of their footsteps grew louder, closer. "We don't have to do this," the woman said. "Come back and we'll make it quick." I couldn't stop myself from looking back. Just a glance. There they were, crouched low in the tunnel, their pale faces hit by my dying flashlight. The children grinded at me, their teeth unnervingly white, and the man tilted his head, watching me. And smiling, I scrambled forward, my hands and knees slamming against the rock. I wasn't even thinking anymore, just moving, desperate to get away. The tunnel curved sharply, and then impossibly. There it was, light. A faint circular beam of sunlight spilled through a crack in the ceiling, cutting through the oppressive darkness like a lifeline. My heart surged. I didn't think about how it made no sense for sunlight to be down here. I didn't care. It was light, and I was going to reach it. I staggered into the chamber, the sunlight warming my face for the first time since I'd entered this nightmare. My legs trembled as I stood upright, my back straightening. For the first time in hours, the circle of light was small, no more than a few feet wide, but it felt like stepping into another world. The footsteps stopped. I turned slowly, my breath hitching as I saw them emerge from the shadows one by one. The man, the woman, the children. They surrounded the beam of sunlight. Standing just outside its reach, their faces were expressionless now, but their eyes gleamed with something cold and calculating. "You think this will save you?" the man asked. I didn't answer. The woman smiled, tilting her head as she studied me. "It's clever, but cleverness won't keep the sun from setting." The little girl giggled. "This is a fun game. We can wait." They didn't move closer. They just stood there. The man folded his arms, and his smile widened. "The sun won't last much longer." I looked up, my eyes tracing the beam of light to its source. He was already fading. The edges of the circle grew dimmer as the minutes ticked by. I didn't know what to do. I sank to my knees in the center of the light, my body trembling. The laughter started then, soft and cruel, echoing off the walls of the cavern. It came from all of them, their voices blending together in a haunting symphony. I closed my eyes, my breath ragged. There was no escape, no way out, and the sun would soon be setting. The sunlight was shrinking, minute by minute, and I could feel my time slipping away. The circle of light that had been my shield was now barely big enough for me to sit in. I hugged my knees. My flashlight died at my side, and I stared at them. They were patient. The man stood just outside the fading light, his pale face stretched into a smug smile. His wife was beside him, her head tilted slightly, studying me like I was some kind of exotic animal in a cage. The children stood close to their parents, silent and still, their dark eyes fixed on me. Every so often the little girl would giggle softly, a sound like nails dragging down my spine. The circle of protection was shrinking inch by inch, and with every bit it receded, the family stepped closer. The boy was the first to move his small, pale foot, stepped into the shadow just beyond the edge of light. Then another stab at another. He stopped just short of the shrinking circle, grinning at me. "You smell scared," he said. "It's good. Fear makes it sweeter." "Enough, darling," the woman said. She placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and smiled down at him. Let him have his last moments in peace. They were waiting for the light to die, waiting for me to be swallowed by the darkness they thrived in. I clenched my jaw, my mind racing. I couldn't let this be the end. There had to be something I could do. The circle of light shrank again. The woman stepped closer. Her bare feet glided soundlessly across the rocky floor. She was only a few feet away now, and the smile on her face was sharper. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to do anything, but just sit here and wait to die. My hands fumbled at my chest, clutching at my jacket like it could somehow shield me. And that's when I felt it. The crucifix, the small silver cross I always wore on a chain around my neck, the one my grandmother had given me. I'd forgotten it was there, buried beneath layers of fabric. My fingers wrapped around it instinctively, and for a moment I hesitated. Did I really believe it would do anything? It was just a symbol, just metal. But I didn't have any better ideas. I pulled the crucifix free, the chain glinting faintly in the dying sunlight. The movement caught their attention immediately. The man's eyes narrowed and the smile slipped from his face. My hand trembled as I held the crucifix in front of me, the silver catching the last rays of sunlight. The woman's expression darkened, and she took a cautious step back. "Put that down," she said, her voice no longer soft. I didn't. I stood slowly, the shrinking circle of light barely large enough to hold me upright. The children hissed, their faces twisting into something that was no longer human. I stepped forward, holding the crucifix out like a shield, and the reaction was immediate. The man recoiled, his face contorted with anger and fear. "That won't save you," he growled, but his voice wavered. I took another step, and they all took a step back, hissing and snarling like cornered animals. The light was almost gone now, just a faint glow around my feet, but the crucifix seemed to hold its own power. They wouldn't come closer. "Stay back," I said, my voice trembling but firm. The man lunged forward, but as soon as the crucifix caught the faintest glint of light, he stumbled back with a guttural snarl. His skin sizzled where the silver had caught him. A faint wisp of smoke rose from his hand, and I didn't wait for him to regroup. Clutching the crucifix like it was my only lifeline, I began moving toward the tunnel. The family circled me, staying just out of reach, their eyes burning with hatred. The children hissed and snapped their teeth, and the woman's face twisted into a mask of rage. My focus was on the tunnel ahead and putting as much distance as I could between myself and them. Every step felt like a battle, my body trembling with fear and exhaustion. The crucifix seemed to almost burn in my hand, but I held it tighter. I didn't let it go. The family followed me, their movements eerily fluid, and the tunnel grew wider as I moved. The air is cooler and fresher. My heart leapt when I saw a faint glow ahead. The entrance, the way out. They saw it too. The woman lunged forward, but the crucifix drove her back again, her skin blistering where the light touched her, near what looked like a rose tattoo on her right arm. The children cried out, their voices high and unnatural, and the man's face twisted into a snarl of pure rage. I stumbled toward the entrance, the cool evening air washing over me like a balm. The sunlight was almost gone, the horizon painted with the last streaks of orange and purple. I didn't stop moving. As I crossed the threshold, the family stopped. They stood just inside the cave, their pale faces framed by the shadows, the last streaks of sunlight glinting off their unblinking eyes. For a moment, none of them moved, and then the little boy tilted his head, his hair falling into his face. "Mom," I'm sad. He could have been part of the family. The man stood at the center. His expression is unreadable, and I didn't wait. My legs ran toward the car. My hand shook as I jammed the key into the ignition, and the engine roared to life. I drove faster than I ever had before, the headlights cutting through the thickening dark, and I didn't stop, not even to look back. When I got to town, I couldn't stay silent. I went straight to the local police, stumbling into the lobby, my words tumbling out in a panicked rush about the family in the cave. The officer behind the desk looked at me like I'd grown a second head. "A pale family in a cave," he said, leaning back in his chair. "And they hissed at your crucifix." I nodded, breathless, trying to emphasize how serious this was. "They blocked the entrance. They are dangerous. People need to stay away from that place. Look, I swear I'm not crazy." The officer exchanged a look with his partner. "Yeah, sure, we'll look into it," he said, but his tone was dismissive. It was clear he didn't believe me. Next, I tried the locals. At the diner, at the gas station, anywhere people would listen. Most humored me with polite nods or nervous chuckles, but I could see it in their eyes. They thought I was just some weird outsider with a wild imagination. Finally, desperate, I went to the church. The priest was old, maybe in his 70s, with a kind but skeptical face. I told him everything. Every detail of the family, the coffins, the shrinking sunlight, and the crucifix. He listened patiently, nodding occasionally, but his expression didn't change. When I finished, He sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Son," he said, his voice slow and measured. "People often see things they don't understand in moments of great fear. I'm sure what you experienced felt real to you, but it was real." I interrupted, slamming my hand on the desk. "They're still out there, waiting for someone else to just wander into that cave." He studied me for a long moment, then leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "I'll pray for you, son," he said simply. His tone was kind, but I could tell he didn't believe a word I'd said. I stood defeated and turned to leave. Just as I reached the door, the priest's voice stopped me. "That tattoo," he said, his voice suddenly sharper. "The one you mentioned on the young woman's arm. What did you say it was again?" I turned back, confused. "It was a rose," it said. "It looked just like, I don't know, a simple black rose." The priest's face was drained of color. He sat back heavily in his chair, his hand gripping the armrest. "A rose," he whispered more to himself than to me. His lips barely moved as he muttered. "Could be a coincidence. It must be a coincidence." I frowned, stepping closer. "What does that mean? Do you know something about them?" But he didn't answer. His gaze was distant, fixed on something far beyond the room we were in. I waited, but when it was clear he wasn't going to say anything else, I left. I couldn't stay in that town. Hell, I couldn't even stay in that state. The cave, the family, the priest's reaction. It was all too much. Within a week, I packed up everything I owned and moved halfway across the country. Some were new. Some were far away from any caves or dark, winding tunnels. I tried to move on, but the memories lingered. I couldn't shake the image of their faces. I kept hearing their voices. I kept the crucifix close, tucked under my shirt at all times, like it was the only thing keeping me safe. And then a few weeks later, I saw the news. It was a short article buried in the local section of an online paper. A series of caves near the area I'd left had collapsed unexpectedly. No one was injured, there weren't any reports of people being inside, but the caves were now completely sealed off. The article mentioned it as a freak geological event or a cave-in, nothing more. But I knew better. The timing, the location, it was too much of a coincidence. I couldn't prove it, and I didn't need to, but I was certain the priest had something to do with it. Maybe he'd gone back to the cave after I left. Maybe he'd seen something that convinced him I was telling the truth. Maybe he'd done something drastic to make sure no one else would ever meet that family. I'll never know for sure. The priest didn't leave any notes, and the article didn't mention him, but I couldn't stop picturing his pale face when I told him about the rose tattoo. Whatever he knew, whatever he'd seen, I'm glad he did it. Maybe they were crushed by the rocks. Maybe they're dead, but I don't think so. All I can hope is that they're trapped in that place, starving, and that they never get out. When a string of robberies began happening around the suburbs where we lived, Amber had suggested we adopt a guard dog. I knew this wasn't the real reason she wanted a dog. However, it was only 6 months ago that her childhood dog, Bubba, had died of old age. From what I was told, he lived for almost 20 years. He was an old, ragged chihuahua when I'd met him with wet, bulging eyes rimmed with gunk, and his tongue constantly slithered out between his gnarled teeth like an earthworm emerging from the mud. I was never fond of Bubba, or any chihuahua for that matter. While I knew instinctively that they could be just as loving and loyal as any other breed of dog, I've never met one that was well behaved. I put up with him for Amber's sake, though, and I mourned with her as he took his last breath in her lap. I knew there was a hole in her heart after Bubba's passing, so the day after she'd suggested adoption, I surprised her with a trip to our local animal shelter. And that's when we met Bambi. Yep, Bambi, as in the cute deer from the Disney movie of the same name. And of course, he was a Chihuahua, a slightly larger than average specimen, with a deer-shaped head and a white coat with fawn splotches on his back. In terms of appearance, the name was perfect, but when it came to temperament, he was nothing like the innocent animated deer. I watched as Amber cooped him from the other side of the cage, and I could already tell, much to my misery, she was head over heels for him. The shelter worker next to me appeared surprised that Amber was fawning over him. She said to us that Bambi had been with the shelter for a long time, and that although many families had viewed him, They all turned him away for one reason or another. She said she once saw a small child burst into little tears of fright just when Bambi looked at her. We have no idea where he's originally from, the worker told us. He was just dumped on our doorstep one day. Nobody claimed ownership of him, and he's been here ever since, with no one wanting to adopt him. She told us Bambi was scheduled to be euthanized. I knew immediately what Amber's reaction would be, and I withheld my objections as she sprung to her feet and told the employee that we'd love to adopt Bambi as soon as possible. As she and the employee talked away, I spared a glance at what would soon be our new dog. Bambi stood perfectly still, and he was as silent as the grave. This was unusual to me, and a small part of me perked up, thinking that maybe if he was this well-behaved, I wouldn't mind having him around after all. That was until I noticed his eyes. As Bambi's head swiveled from Amber to me, I felt a small shiver roll up my spine. His eyes were so black. No, black wasn't the right description here. It was more like staring into a complete void of nothingness, like there wasn't any life behind those dark pits. It felt wrong, and I knew then why that little girl had burst into tears when Bambi looked at her. There was a part of me that wanted to grab Amber's arm and drag her far away from here and let that dog be put down. I stopped that thought dead in its tracks as I forced myself to look away from Bambi. No, come on. What was I thinking? It was just a dog, and no dog should just be put down like that. I still couldn't get his eyes out of my head, though, and I tapped Amber's shoulder to get her attention. Don't his eyes look, kind of weird to you? I asked, hoping for some validation. Amber turned back to Bambi and knelt down to meet my eyes. She stuck a finger through the cage, using it to scratch his chin. Oh, you're cuter, aren't you? Who's a good boy? You are. Yeah, you are, she said. The whole time she was talking to him, not once did his tail wag. Not once did he make a sound. Not once. Did he even blink? Things only got weirder when we brought Bambi to his new home. For sure, I never saw him. It should have been more cause for alarm, but he never lost weight or looked to be starving, so we just kind of accepted it for what it was. Amber still left food for him and still took him outside to use the bathroom. But not even once did he actually even pee or poop. He just stood there staring at her. Or me, in the unfortunate circumstance that I was the one forced to take him out. He always stayed perfectly still, just watching me with those empty eyes until I relented, opened the door for him, and we went back inside. I'll take this opportunity to mention that our house isn't a large one. In fact, it is the smallest one in our neighborhood. My parents had bought it for us at a dirt cheap price as a wedding present a year ago. It's a bit run down, but it's ours and Amber, and I look forward to starting the rest of our lives here. It's one story made of red brick and a dark brown roof that I have to fix every month or two. Inside, there's just a living room which housed a glass cabinet filled with family heirlooms, a kitchen dining room, a small hallway with a cramped closet, and an equally cramped bathroom and 2 bedrooms. One of them is ours, and the other we use for storage. See, the only reason I bring all this up is that for whatever reason, Bambi really likes the storage room. Amber tried to coax him into sleeping in our room, but Bambi stubbornly refused every time. And so his little bed sat in the middle, surrounded by cardboard boxes, and that was perfectly fine with me. Bambi never played. He never scampered around like a little dog should. He never curled into Amber's lap when she patted it. He never did anything that a dog should do. It was wrong. It was wrong, and he was wrong, but somehow Amber never saw it like I did. He's shy. She once shot back at me when I tried explaining how I felt. He was dumped on a street, and he's been alone ever since. Don't you think that affects him? Of course he won't play or cuddle with us, Adrian. Nobody has given Bambi a chance before, so why should he be trustful of anybody? She'd said. Any other dog would have opened up by now. I argued, feeling like I wanted to pull my hair out. He's not normal. Why can't you see that? These things take time. Bambi needs time. As his new family, we need to be patient with him. We need to keep showing him love and support, and he'll eventually open up to us. I know he will. All the while, Bambi silently watched us before he turned away and padded back to his room. This is how life continued for the next few months. And all day there would be this heavy weight on my shoulders. I felt trapped in my own home, and I felt like this damn dog was ruining my relationship. Things got more tense between Amber and I. Every day, something would set us off and we'd snap and bark at each other and end the day feeling miserable. Amber continued to work with Bambi while I did my best to ignore him. That would piss her off and the arguments would start all over again. One night, Amber kicked me out of our room and threw me my pillow and a thin blanket. I'd suggested we return Bambi to the dog shelter, and needless to say, that conversation ended badly. I laid on the couch, brooding over how unfair my life had become and how Bambi was at the center of it. This wasn't right before he came along. Things were perfect between Amber and I. We were happy and laughing and enjoying life every day. But Bambi was like a poison. His silence and his empty eyes hung over our house like some molded tarp, and I was the only one who saw it. I heard the familiar sound of Bambi's nails clicking against the hardwood floor, and I turned my head to see him staring at me from a few feet away. An all too familiar chill touched the back of my neck, but I ignored it and glared defiantly back at that damn mutt. "Can I help you?" I asked. Bambi continued to stare at me, and then he grinned. Good God, he grinned like a human would. His lips stretched upwards, and it was much too large for a damn chihuahua. His fangs glistened, and for a moment I feared he would leap at me and devour me. That moment of terror stretched for an eternity, and just when I couldn't stand it anymore, the grin disappeared. Bambi turned around and retreated back to his room. I didn't sleep that night, or for most of the week. When the week neared its end, Amber got a call from the hospital. Her mother was in emergency care and was going to be transferred to a hospital in another city. It's not my place to be airing my mother-in-law's dirty laundry on the internet, so I will refrain from talking about why she was hospitalized. Amber immediately packed her bags in a rush, all while searching for any pet-friendly hotel she could stay at while she would be visiting her mother. None that would allow pets were in our budget, so she reluctantly turned to me and frowned. "You need to take care of Bambi while I'm gone," she informed me, making sure I was meeting her eyes. "I need you to promise me that you'll do it." Gulped. After that night on the couch, I got from hating Bambi to being terrified of him. The last thing I wanted was to be alone with him. I forced myself to agree to care for him for her sake. "Okay," I stammered, trying to ignore the demon chihuahua at our feet. "No problem." "Good," Amber said, taking a deep breath and stepping closer to me. She planted a kiss on my lips, the first one in what felt like ages. I think some time away from each other will be good for us," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Things have been hard, but I do love you." "I love you too," I replied. "And don't worry, Bambi and I will be here when you get back." She closed her eyes and leaned in close to hug me. "Thank you," she whispered. And then she was gone, and I was to be alone with Bambi for the next week and a half, the first 2 days. I locked myself in my room and just left Bambi to his own devices. By this point, I knew he didn't need to eat or go outside. I knew he wasn't just a chihuahua. Every time I closed my eyes, all I saw was that horrific, uncanny, evil grin. I knew that he knew the effect it was having on me, and I knew that behind that empty expression he wore, he must have enjoyed it 2 weeks earlier, and that would have pissed me off. Now it just filled me with dread. I was alone with a monster, and every hour I feared what he would do to me. On the second night, I get my answer. As I laid there, I could faintly hear his nails clicking on the hardwood floor. He was pacing around the house, moving from the living room to the kitchen and back again. It was almost like Bambi was on patrol, and it was the most active I'd seen, or rather heard him. I chewed my bottom lip anxiously. What was different? Was he making his move tonight? Was he taunting me? Or was it all just coincidence? I suddenly realized that while lost in my theory crafting, I lost track of his pacing. I held my breath, wondering where he was in the house. Did he finally go back to his room? I was almost ready to relax when I heard something scratch at the bottom of the door. I froze, eyes shooting straight through my blood as Bambi continued to scratch relentlessly at the door. His tiny nails clawed into the wood desperately. If he was any other dog, I'd coo over the adorable behavior and let him in. But Bambi wasn't doing this to be cute. He was trying to get me. He was trying to kill me, Bambi, I said, hating how my voice cracked in fear. You better stop it. The scratching stopped, and silence filled the entire house. Bambi didn't make a sound for the longest time, but then he started scratching again. Only these weren't the scratches of a little chihuahua. They were louder and so much deeper. They belonged to the claws of a much larger animal, and the sounds of him trying to get through the door echoed through the whole room. I clamped down on my ears and hid under my blanket as I realized that the scratches were starting from the very top of the door and working their way down to the bottom. Too large, much too large for even the biggest dog. What was on the other side of that door? What the hell did we bring into our house? Stop it! I shouted, and once more everything went silent. Was it over? Was he gone? The doorknob shook. I locked the door, but I never expected this. A moment passed. Then Bambi, or whatever Bambi was now, tried again. He threw his weight against the door while he continued to twist and pull at the doorknob. I watched in horror as the entire door frame and even the walls shook with each slam against the door. I leapt out from my bed and I searched for something I could use as a weapon. The door was not going to hold. Bambi was going to break in here and kill me. But then the worst thing happened. Something I hadn't even thought possible, but was so much worse than him breaking in. Bambi spoke. Adrian. He rasped his voice. It was that of a being with a throat so dry it hadn't spoken in centuries. No millennia. It was the voice of time itself, of the beginning and the end. This voice witnessed creation as we know it, and will witness the end of everything. It clawed at my hearing, clinging to it with nails more ancient than the earth itself. Adrian, open the door, Adrian. The door splintered open, and I passed out in fear. It was the sunlight that peeked through the blinds that awoke me. I blinked and stared up at the ceiling. The events of last night filtered through, and with a gasp I shot up, only to realize I couldn't. Something was weighing me down, something so heavy I felt like my lungs would burst. I glanced down and a scream was caught in my throat. Bambi was sitting on me, his empty eyes piercing directly through mine. Eyes that I now know told the story of a being far more ancient than I could have imagined. A being who knew the empty abyss were all destined for when we die, and who could send me there whenever it wanted. Bambi tilted his head slightly, an action that would have gotten a joyous gasp out of Amber on any other day. He then stepped off of me and padded through the now broken door. I watched him vanish into his room, and the moment he was out of sight, I raced towards the bathroom, upheaving every content of my stomach for what felt like hours. It was hopeless. I never felt so defeated, so small and insignificant in my entire life. I knew what Bambi was now, and I knew that there was nothing I could do about him. At any moment, he could send me to the void in his eyes, my soul trapped forever in an empty hell of his making. I wished at that moment that we never went to that stupid shelter. I wish we never adopted this thing, and brought it into our home. I wanted to take him and drown him. I wanted him dead and gone, but I knew nothing I did would matter. Bambi wasn't a dog. He looked like one, sure, but he was something far, far more powerful. He would come back. He would come back and torment me for eternity, because all he saw me as was an insignificant toy for him to ruin and throw away. I paused, wiping my mouth and glancing towards the direction of Bambi's room. If this was all true, why was I just now doubting it? Contradicting thoughts raced through my head, crashing and colliding and making more contradictions. Why a chihuahua? Why appear at a shelter? Why would an eldritch allow itself to be taken home? Why not just torture us endlessly? Why act like nothing like an ordinary dog, but still a dog? Why tolerate Amber? Why go after me? Why speak to me? Why horrify me? Why do all this now when Amber left? Why? I needed to test this. There was a number. It could be that stupidly simple. Swallowing my fear, I timidly called Bambi's name. He didn't show, so I cleared my throat. Bambi? I called. Come here, boy. A few seconds passed, and eventually Bambi peeked around the corner. He gazed at me intensely, but I forced myself to let the fear wash over me and steeled myself. I grinned and held out my hand. Come here, Bambi, I cooked with the same soft tone Amber used. After a few more seconds, Bambi approached. He stopped a foot away from me, standing perfectly still with his unblinking, abyssal eyes. It was all so perfectly Bambi, I realized. With a nervous laugh, I reached over and rubbed the top of his head. His fur was so soft, I'd never realized it because I'd always refused to touch him. Bambi didn't react to being pet, but I don't think he needed to. If he did, then he wouldn't be Bambi. You know what? Screw it, I thought. If nobody else wanted this freaky eldritch demon of a dog, then I guess Amber and I would just have to give him a home instead. Standing up, I whistled for Bambi to follow me as I walked confidently to the kitchen, where his leash laid on the table. Amber had bought it on his first day here, but Bambi always doggedly refused to go on a walk. Well, that was going to change today. The moment Bambi saw the leash, he stopped following and began to turn around. "Hey, not today," I said cheekily as I scooped the chihuahua up. Bambi tensed in my arms, and I remembered that this was the first time either of us had picked him up. I gave him a wet smooch on his cheek and carried him out the front door. I set him down on the sidewalk in front of our house and quickly fastened his leash on him. I tugged on it gently. "Come on, boy." I was encouraged. "Let's go." Bambi didn't move. He didn't blink. He didn't wag his tail. All of these I expected of him by now. Yet I continued to gently tug on the leash, always making sure to never hurt him. I wasn't giving up that easily, even if it meant standing here all day, looking like a complete ass in front of the whole neighborhood. And eventually, Bambi took a step forward, followed by another. Our walk began at a snail's pace. I got the feeling Bambi was reluctant about all of this. Amusingly, I think he eventually realized that he, the actual eldritch deity, was not going to get his way this time. He walked by my side now, his eyes trained forward and his body a little stiff, even though he never showed emotions. I got the impression he was slightly embarrassed to be put here, guided by a leash like a common house pet. A sudden series of barks startled me, and I looked up to see we were passing by a young woman and her own dog, a golden retriever. The dog was pulling at its leash, teeth bared as it snarled and snapped towards Bambi with such unbridled fury. The poor young woman was desperately holding her dog back, a look of shock and confusion in her eyes, indicating that this wasn't normal. She tried apologizing over her dog's booming barks, but I waved her off, telling her it's fine. All the while, Bambi was staring ahead, his head calmly turned towards the much bigger dog. The golden retriever made eye contact with Bambi for only a second, when it suddenly yelped in pain and retreated between its owner's legs, shaking intensely. The woman looked at her dog's sudden change of behavior and then looked back at us. I knew that she saw what I previously saw in Bambi. I shrugged apologetically as Bambi, and I left her behind. Bambi and I settled into a routine after this, after I fixed the bedroom door, of course. We'd wake up, I'd eat breakfast. I'd take him on a walk before dropping him back off at the house and leaving for work. I'd come back, take him on another walk, grab some ice cream and a pup cup he never ate, and return home for the night. Despite all this, Bambi never blinked, never moved more than he had to, and never wagged his tail. But that was okay. I knew Bambi wasn't the emotional type. I called and FaceTimed Amber every day, both telling and showing her the progress Bambi and I were making together. To say she was ecstatic would be an understatement. I'd never seen her smile so wide before. She told me her mother was feeling better, and they'd be back the next afternoon. Bambi retreated to his room, and I settled into bed, excited for what tomorrow would bring. I didn't process it at first, but what awoke me was the sound of footsteps. Not Bambi's, but those of someone wearing heavy boots. Actually, I think there were multiple people by the sounds of it, and I could hear them speaking. I couldn't make out the words, but I think they were trying to be quiet. I blinked in confusion and reached for my phone. Was Amber back? Did she bring her mom back too? The phone read 2:41 a.m. No, it wasn't Amber. I listened again and realized that the voices were male. I shot up, suddenly a lot more awake, with my heart pounding in my chest. Robbers. I slowly slid out of my bed, wincing as the floor beneath me creaked. The voices suddenly stopped. I heard footsteps thudding towards my room, and before I could hide, the door was forced open with a mighty kick. I yelled in surprise as a large, burly man rushed inside, and I found the barrel of a gun pointed directly at my face. "Stay down," he said as his large boot struck my chest. The air was driven from my lungs as I collapsed onto the floor. The man pinned me down with his boot, the gun still trained on me. His hand was shaking, I noticed. "Shit," he muttered. "Shit, shit, shit." He turned his head back and called out to his accomplices. "Hurry up, guys. We gotta go." I heard glass shatter, and I realized that they were going after the cabinet full of heirlooms. "Please," I said. "Stop this." "Shut up," the man said. The man was not a professional, some observant part of me realized. He was beginning to panic. Through blurred vision, I saw a small shape enter the room. It paused and looked up at the man holding me at gunpoint. It was Bambi. Forgetting what he was for a moment, I silently pleaded with him to run and hide. But that wasn't what Bambi did. For the very first time, Bambi barked. It was a shrill, ear-grating noise, very typical for a Chihuahua. That annoying yapping that drives nails into your head. It was the kind of bark that made you hide your face in embarrassment. Because your untrained Chihuahua started attacking your guest, and you had to lock it in another room. The barking startled the man, who turned towards Bambi and swore loudly. "You gotta be joking." He cupped his hand to his mouth and tried talking over Bambi. "All right, let's go, guys. People are gonna hear this, and the cops are gonna be on us." "Shut him up," one of the others said. The robber hissed as he stepped off of me. I propped myself against the wall as the man walked towards my dog. I shot my hand out in a feeble attempt to stop him. "No, don't," I begged, but I'm not sure who I was talking to at that moment. In slow motion, I watched as the man swung his foot back, intending to kill Bambi in one fierce kick. As it sailed towards the Chihuahua, I saw something that reminded me of why I used to be so scared of Bambi in the first place. His empty eyes. They weren't empty anymore. There was something moving in them. A maelstrom of eternity. I saw everything. I saw the creation of the universe and its destruction, only for that destruction to lead to another creation. The universe was created and destroyed over and over, and I sat there witnessing all of it. Bambi wasn't an aspect of the void. He was the void. He was infinity itself. He was where we came from, and he was where we'd return to when we died. This wasn't some Cthulhu-type monster I previously thought was trying to break down my door. This was something far, far worse. Hearing it on the other side of the door was bad enough, but my words could never hope to accurately describe what I was witnessing. I knew at that moment I should have gone mad, that I should have died tearing my eyes out and screaming until I choked on my own boar. But I didn't. I couldn't. Bambi wouldn't let me. I was his. I was now his favorite, destined along with the rest of my family line to be disciples of his nothingness. The void would love us and protect us so long as we loved it in return. It was a contradiction beyond everything else, but Bambi didn't care. The rules were his to make. I was only able to pull my eyes away from him when a blood-curdling scream tore itself from the man. His leg had connected with Bambi, but the Chihuahua of eternity didn't flinch. Instead, the leg exploded into a shower of blood and gore that caked the entire room in a deep crimson. The man fell to the ground, and Bambi was on top of him, much bigger now, and looking nothing like a dog anymore. The creature before me was nowhere near Bambi's true form. It was that alone which gave me courage to watch. It was tall. So tall that I had no idea how it would fit in the room. Jagged bones rattled and folded against each other to accommodate the room's small size. It was an aspect of the void, pure darkness given shape, yet I could see it so clearly. It was skinny, so skinny I thought I could wrap my fingers around it. Large, like claws dug into the man's side as he screamed for a mercy that would never come. There was no face on the creature, yet one of its claws reached up and stabbed into the head, forcibly and violently tearing into it, until a gaping, bloody maw resembling a mouth was made. The creature let out a rattling breath before its new mouth dove onto the man's head, feasting on him like a starved prisoner tearing into bread. 2 sets of footsteps ran down the hall and stopped just outside the bedroom. I heard 2 men scream in pure maddening terror, and that caught the creature's attention. It turned towards them. Its claws were still ripping into the long dead man, even though there was nothing left to identify it as one, just a mushy pile of flesh and blood. It let out a wheezing bark before it lunged towards the two robbers, and I lost sight of it as it tackled them into the hall. I heard it, though. I heard the ripping and tearing, and I heard their screams being silenced. I sat there, numb and covered in blood, and mentally reeling over everything I just witnessed. I heard a low growl, and the creature crawled awkwardly into the room, its impossibly numerous bones shifting and crackling to allow it to fit. With a bitter laugh, I realized that Bambi never intended to harm me that first night, for if he did, then this would have happened. I fought back to that dog's evil grin and wondered if I misinterpreted that as well. I watched the creature approach and felt fear well up inside me. I instinctively tried to back away. The creature noticed and paused. Shame pulled over me as I forced myself to relax. This was Bambi. This was my Chihuahua. I noticed one last detail about this form. The large ears perked up on its head. The thing opened its deformed mouth and let out what sounded like a small whine. Daydream. Safe. A smile broke past my lips, and I held out my hand towards the creature. Good boy, Bambi, I whispered as it leaned its head against my palm. We stayed like that for a while, but eventually I heard a knock at the door. I ignored it at first, but as the knocking persisted, I groaned painfully and stood up. As I walked towards the front door, I heard a familiar clicking of nails. Looking down, I saw Bambi following me as a Chihuahua once again. I knelt down and rubbed his head, and to my surprise, he licked me. I watched in silent awe as all the blood seeped off of me and funneled into Bambi's mouth. Before I knew it, I was completely cleansed, and Bambi promptly returned to the hallway, where I could now see he was licking up all the blood and gore. What a good dog, I chuckled to myself. I opened the door and smiled. Hello, officer, I greeted you. Is everything all right? The officer, an older man with a stink eye, looked at me curiously. Some neighbors called about a noise complaint, said they heard shouting in what sounded like a fight. Do you mind explaining that? Of course, I said, as I opened the door wider and let the officer through. I showed him the living room and the broken glass of the china cabinet. Some robbers broke in and tried to steal stuff in the cabinet there, I said, pausing and glancing at the front door. I think I forgot to lock the door, officer, I said. How the officer clicked his tongue and looked around. And the robbers. 3 of them, I clarified. And my guard dog chased him out. Guard dog? The officer asked. And at that moment, Bambi made his entrance. All traces of blood were now gone, and he stopped by my feet. The officer smirked. You mean this little thing? Yep, I confirmed with a smile. Bambi here, well, he may not look like much, but he's as fierce as they come. Even bit him a couple times. The officer laughed and bent down to Bambi's level. He began to praise him for being such a brave boy. When he paused, his brow furrowed as he looked into Bambi's eyes. I noticed him start to shake when I cleared my throat to get his attention. The officer stood up. Then he trailed off and glanced down at Bambi before shaking his head and turning back to me. Well, if they're gone, then that's that. But if you want, I can put another officer here for the night to watch your house while you sleep. Make sure they don't come back, you know. Of course, I agree. Though I think Bambi here is enough protection. I reached down and patted his head gently while he looked at me with those empty, bottomless eyes. Life moved on after that. Amber came back the next morning, and I told her about the break-in, but not about what Bambi had done. I gave her the same story I gave the officer, and she praised Bambi for being such a brave boy. Imagine her surprise when, for the very first time, Bambi wagged his tail. I guess she was right about him needing time and all that. Though, even 5 years later, he's still mostly the same silent, unblinking Chihuahua we love. He sleeps with us now, as the second bedroom now belongs to our daughter. Though he doesn't seem to mind his space being stolen, he loves that girl more than anything. If anyone can get him to wag his tail, it's her. Eternity in the void is a lonely thing, but imagine being that eternity even more so. I sometimes wonder if that's why he chose the form of a Chihuahua, to find people who would make his infinite existence a little more meaningful. Now that he's found us, his forever home, he won't be lonely anymore. And when my family line eventually dies off, we'll return to his void. Our existence will become part of him, and so he'll never be apart from us. That doesn't scare me, you know. It means I'll always have my loyal, loving guard dog. Sometimes I have nightmares. I'll dream of a blood-soaked room and bodies piled high. But when I wake up, I'll reach over and stroke Bambi's fur. He'll comfort me, and I'll drift off to sleep with his words echoing in my head. Family. Safe Bambi, protect. There's one rule that could save your life. Tell a ranger if you meet a lost child in the woods. Don't help a kid. Don't even talk to him. Just walk away and let us handle it. We don't want any more disappearances in this park. Think of your own kids. I've worked with the National Park Service in Ohio for the last 20 years. All these years, dealing with rugged landscapes, weather emergencies, and lost or injured hikers have shaped me. Sure, working is difficult, and it can be stressful, but I take it all instead of being stuck in an office all day. But despite my skills and love for the outdoors, something happened a few years back that shook me to my core. Even now, hearing reports of similar incidents, it just makes my blood run cold. It was a chilly, overcast day in early November. I just finished up some trail maintenance when a woman runs up to me. She looked like she'd been crying. Her clothes were dirty, and she appeared disheveled. I asked if she was okay. She stammered out a nearly incoherent sentence about a little boy who was lost in the woods. Finally, after she started to calm down, I got it out of her. She was hiking alone when she stopped because she heard faint crying. She followed the sound to find a young boy who looked about 5 or 6 years old. He was just sitting on the ground, crying. No one was with him, which was concerning. She approached him and asked if he was lost. He continued to cry, not answering the question. She knelt down next to him and patted his shoulder, attempting to comfort him, but nothing seemed to stop him from crying. "Why don't you come with me, okay? Let's look for your mommy and daddy," she said. He stood up and dried his tears and then walked with her in silence for a few minutes. She tried to get some basic information out of him, his name, his parents' names when he last saw them, but he wouldn't say anything. The boy just kept saying that he lived in a house nearby. The problem with this was there weren't any houses nearby. The park, it's a very remote area, so the woman chalks it up to his age and not understanding distances. She couldn't get any cell reception, so she tried navigating them back to a higher traffic area of the trail to find help. She reported that the young boy was very resistant to this. He kept trying to pull her deeper into the forest, babbling about how his parents' house wasn't very far. The woman tried to persuade him to follow her, but he just wouldn't. She tried grabbing his hand to lead him. This didn't work. He yanked her arm so hard that she said it injured her shoulder. He had more strength than any kid his age and size possibly could, she said. At this point, the woman panicked. She yanked her hand free, and then she just took off. It took her a long time to find her way back to the trail, and then she ran into me. I helped her find her way back, and I agreed to go look for the boy. Now, truthfully, I wasn't sure how much of her story I believed. I knew from experience that being out here alone can mess with your mind, compound that with exhaustion and dehydration, and you have a recipe for not seeing things as they are. However, if there was even the slightest chance that a little kid was out there lost, I was going to find him. You see, I had a personal experience with a missing persons case. My sister, Sky, had been missing for over 3 years at this point. She didn't go missing out in these woods, though. She disappeared during an out-of-state road trip she'd been planning for months. It was her first trip by herself. It's the first step to achieving her dream of traveling the world solo. Unfortunately for me and our parents, there were very few leads. We'd spent countless months in the city where she was last seen. We continually worked with law enforcement to find something, anything to go off of, but we eventually had to return to our lives with no real answers, and I never wanted any other family to go through what we have. So I took off in the direction the woman described, and I looked around for almost an hour before giving up and heading back. There were no reports of a missing child in the area, So again, I just figured it was her mind playing tricks on her, and just as I changed course, I heard a faint laugh. I paused and carefully I followed the sound a few yards until I found a young boy sitting on the forest floor, playing with rocks and twigs. "Hey there," I said as I approached him. "What's your name?" He glanced up at me, gave me a shy look, then went back to playing with the rocks and twigs. I gently tapped him on the shoulder. He stood up and tapped my arm back. "Tag, you're it," he said. I sighed and ran after him. Being in my early 40s, I knew it wouldn't be easy to keep up with him, and he darted in a zigzag pattern around the trees. I was running out of breath when I finally caught up to him. He darted into an opening in the rock and then disappeared from sight. It was the entrance to a cave. I cursed under my breath. The sun was already going down, and I was exhausted from a long day, but I had to go in after him. I yelled out for him, warning him this wasn't a game anymore and caves aren't the best places to play in. Silence. I shined my flashlight around, and I noticed tunnels branching off in different directions. I started with the one on the left. Now, I wasn't very familiar with this cave system. Truth be told, caves, they kind of gave me the creeps, silly as that sounds. Something about being underground and cut off from the rest of the world. It was unnerving to me, and I walked through the darkness, looking for any sign of the young boy. Every footstep of mine echoed. I eventually realized I stumbled into an open area of the cave system. I shined my flashlight around, trying to get a sense of the layout, and I noticed the light passed something white near the ceiling. Without thinking, I turned the light back onto it, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It had to be 6 feet long, and it had an even longer wingspan. It looked like a giant moth, but with humanoid arms and legs. It was a sickly, pale white all over. I couldn't see its face, and I pointed my flashlight back towards the ground. Then I began to slowly back away. I could hear it begin to stir. To my horror, I heard a whoosh of air, and it began to fly towards me, and I just took off trying to outrun it. I could hear a loud buzzing noise from behind me. It was so loud it made my ears ring. In all my years working with wildlife, this was not anything I'd heard before. It sounded like a combination of an angry wasp, a human scream, and I don't mean a battle cry. It sounded like the kind of scream someone does when they're in massive pain or extremely terrified. The creature was gaining on me. I picked up a rock and I chucked it as hard as I possibly could. I heard a thud as it fell to the ground. Still making that disturbing screaming noise, I only got a quick look at its face. But what I saw, it'll never leave my mind. Glowing red eyes. No pupil, no iris. Just beady red bulbs. I tore through the cave and I quickly climbed up the same entrance I came in. I stopped to catch my breath. What the hell did I just see? But just as I was getting my bearings, I saw the boy. He was climbing a tree. "Hey," I yelled. He looked my way. "So I know you're having fun out here, but it's about to get dark and I'm sure your parents are worried about you. How about we go find him?" And to my surprise, the boy just nodded and climbed down. I tried to ask him his name, but he wouldn't answer. I asked where his parents were, and he said they lived nearby. He pointed in a direction I knew couldn't be right. There were no houses anywhere even remotely close to that part of the forest. And I told him to follow me. And he did, at least at first. He quickly became distracted, though, by a stream. He ran over to it and started splashing and playing in the water. I tried to coax him out with some snacks I had left over, but he wasn't interested. "You're still it," he said. And then he ran away using the stepping stones of the stream, and I sighed and followed him. Unfortunately, I'm not as agile as I used to be, and I slipped. I fell face first into the water, and I felt this sharp pain in my leg, and I saw a huge gash oozing blood that stained the water red. I'd cut my leg on a sharp rock. "Damn it," I yelled. The boy had made it to the other side of the stream at this point. I looked up to see him running towards the trees. I need to find help, I thought. This kid was not being cooperative, and there was no way I could get him out of here myself with this injury. I pulled myself out of the stream and into the grass beside it. I was struggling to figure out how I could even get myself back home. Now I wrapped my leg with some first aid supplies I always carried with me. My phone had gotten wet, and it wouldn't even boot up. Even if I found any reception, I was out of luck. I was very angry with myself for getting into this situation. I knew better than to climb into uncharted caves alone or to play stepping stone like I was a kid again. I tried to stand up and walk, but I only made it 20 feet before I fell again. It would be dark soon, I thought, and as I tried to catch my breath, I noticed a bird chirping on a branch, but the sound wasn't quite right. It almost sounded like a tea kettle. Exhaustion was taking over me. I closed my eyes and I buried my head in my hands. When I reopened my eyes, I wasn't in the woods anymore. I could hear a tea kettle. I was indoors in bed in an unfamiliar home, and it was daylight now. I jumped and looked around. There was no one else in the room. I went to sit up, and I noticed my legs still hurt, although not nearly as bad. It was neatly bandaged. There was a wooden walking stick next to the bed. I grabbed it, and I used it to take some weight off my leg as I stood up. I made my way out of the bedroom, and I looked around. The home was quiet, but it was clearly inhabited. It was a small, bright-looking cottage. "Hello," I called out as I looked around. A few minutes later, I heard the front door open, and I jumped. A pretty blonde woman who looked like she was in her 30s walked in. Pretty was an understatement. This woman was stunning. Her presence gave off this warm and friendly aura. She wore a light blue dress and carried a wicker basket full of berries and herbs, it looked like. "Hey, I'm glad to see you up," she said, smiling. "You were in bad shape when I found you yesterday." "I'm Haven, by the way." "I'm Jason," I replied. We shook hands. I asked her how she found me, and she told me she was out for a walk when she noticed me. According to her, I was unconscious, so she brought me back here to help me. I really appreciate this," I told her. "But why didn't you just take me to the hospital?" Haven gave me a quizzical look. "Why would I take you somewhere that would charge you $1,000 to do something that I can easily do for free? Your leg's getting better, right?" she asked. I nodded. I gathered from our conversation that Haven is a modern-day hippie. She told me she never went to public school. She lived off the land instead of going to the store. And she doesn't trust modern medicine. I figured, based on what she was telling me, that she didn't even have a phone. I was right, but she agreed to give me a ride back into town, though she practically begged me to stay for breakfast first. I reluctantly agreed. She started cooking and she poured me a cup of tea. We talked some more, and I started to feel very drowsy. When I woke back up, I wasn't in the kitchen anymore. I was back in the bedroom I found myself in that morning. I looked out the window. It was dark now. The window was way too small for me to climb out of. So I quietly opened the bedroom door and looked around. The house was quiet. There was a door across the hall from mine, and I wondered if this was Haven's room. I felt groggy, which made it very difficult to stay focused. The front door was locked. Why would someone lock their front door from the inside? And then I heard a scratching noise coming from a closed door by the kitchen. I quickly snuck over, and I put my ear up to the door. Behind the thick door, I could hear a faint voice crying for help. I tried opening the door, but it was locked, and I began searching for the key, checking every drawer and cabinet. Finally, I found a ring of keys. I frantically tried several, and after what felt like I tried all of them, the lock moved. Then I opened it to see the boy from the woods. He was sitting at the bottom of the basement stairs, crying. "She locked me down here," he said. "Okay, all right, I'm gonna get you out of here," I whispered back. The boy continued to cry and refused to stand up and follow me. He walked farther into the basement, so I had to follow him. The light was dimmed down there, but I could make out glass jars. There were dozens of them lining the shelves. I crept closer, and I saw something floating in them, small orbs of bouncy balls. And when I got closer, I realized what they were. They were eyes in various states of decay. What the hell had I walked into? I jumped back, and I noticed a hole in the ground towards the back of the basement. It had a thick rope dangling down into it. I touched the rope, and I noticed it had this odd texture. It took me a moment to realize why. It was woven together with human hair. The strands were of different colors and lengths. I couldn't even begin to imagine how much hair would be needed for this, and I started to tremble. Okay, this was insane. I'd had enough. I saw the boy crouched in the corner near the pit. I tried to pick him up, but he fought me off. But I was more direct with him this time. Look, it isn't safe here, and we need to get out of here now, I said. The boy sank to the floor, crying. He started apologizing profusely. Why are you saying sorry? I asked, still trying to shush him. She makes me bring her people, he said. Who is she? I asked. Mom, he whispered, and my hands started shaking then. What does she do when you get people? I asked. The boy said nothing, and I pointed to the hole in the ground. I climbed back up the stairs as quickly as my injured leg would let me, and the door was now locked. I hobbled back down the stairs. I had no idea where the boy was at this point. It was like he had just vanished. The only other place he could be was a closet-like room on the side. The door swung gently on a loose hinge. I peered in, and I saw it looked like suits hung up neatly in rows, covered in plastic. I turned on a light. These weren't suits, I realized. They were human skins. I stifled a scream. I closed the door, and I began retching. I sat on the floor for several minutes, trying to pull myself together. Eventually, my breathing regulated, and I just started pacing, trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do. Okay, I'm in a deranged stranger's basement, injured. This woman is so crazy that she uses her kid to lure people into her home so she can skin them. I don't even know where this house is, other than it's a remote area in the woods. She freaking this lady kills people, skins them like animals, and then she puts their bodies in some hole in the ground. Why? I wondered. As I paced, I noticed a desk stacked with books in the back of the basement. I sat down in the chair and began rifling through the books, hoping for some sort of clue that would get me the hell out of this mess, but the books only contained strange images, creatures I'd never seen before. One of them looked very similar to what I saw in the cave system, the large humanoid moth creature. Another was a bipedal creature that had what looked like antlers, a giant mutant deer standing on two legs. The thing's fur was ragged, and bones popped out of its sides in a way that looked very painful. Some of these creatures appeared more humanoid than others. Some lived underwater or underground. But somehow the worst of them were the pages filled with drawings of humans. They looked like something out of a medical textbook. Each detail was rendered carefully, from the smallest nerves to the organs. I heard the door at the top of the stairs budge then, and I shut the book and I dove behind a few barrels to hide. I tried to breathe as quietly as I could. Tim, yelled Haven. I heard her walk towards the little boy, and they began arguing. It was on the other side of the room, but from what I could hear, she was demanding to know if he'd seen me, and he denied knowing where I was. She muttered something about doing this herself, and then walked to the closet. Curiosity got the better of me then, and I peered through the space between the two barrels. I saw her pulling out one of the human skins from its plastic cover, and putting it on like a snowsuit. I had to force myself not to gag at the sight of this. She began chanting something I couldn't make out, and then the skin seemed to tighten around her. It wrapped itself around her body, and then it contorted itself in a new form. I watched as the seams disappeared, and the skin bulged and then solidified over itself. Haven now looked like a 6-foot-tall, muscular man. She donned a pair of jeans and a flannel top, and a few moments later, I heard the front door open and shut. I waited several minutes before emerging from behind the barrels. Tim snuck up on me, causing me to jump. "I can help you," he whispered. I didn't feel I had much of a choice, so I agreed to follow his lead. He told me we would need to exit out of the hole in the ground using a rope made of human hair. I didn't like this, but Tim motioned for me to follow him as he climbed down the rope, and I followed. Once we were underground, Tim advised me to turn down my flashlight and to stay very quiet. I followed him down the dark, winding tunnels, and they seemed to go on forever. As we kept walking, I thought I heard an extra set of footsteps, except they weren't coming from the cave floor, but rather from the wall behind us. I glanced upward, and on the side of the cave wall I could see something crawling. Although it was dark and difficult to see, I could make out that it was very large, at least 7 feet tall, and with disturbingly human-like skin. The shape was far from human, though. The creature's body and head were flat. Its head was almost square-shaped and crawled on 10 spindly legs. It continued to climb the wall and scale the ceiling above us, and I held my breath as I carefully sped up. I didn't want that thing dropping on me. I wanted to ask Tim what the hell this thing was, but I didn't want to draw attention to myself. For now, it seemed to leave us alone and mind its own business. We continued walking in silence, and I wondered how long it would be till we resurfaced. My leg was hurting again, so I couldn't walk fast. Even with the panic rising in my chest, I knew I had to stay focused to get out of here. I also began to wonder if I could really trust this kid. After all, it was him who had lured me here. I wondered if Haven actually was his mother at all, and was he even a kid? And then my thoughts were interrupted by an unexpected guest. A goat emerged from the cave behind me. It seemed to be wandering around the tunnels just like we were, whining as it was looking for a way out. How'd you get down here?" I said, petting it. Tim, who was walking in front of me, snapped back around. "No," he said. He grabbed my arm and pulled me away. He sped down the tunnel with me, and I tried to ask, but all he would tell me was that wasn't a goat, that I shouldn't trust the creatures in these tunnels in the back of my mind. I wondered if that should include him. It wasn't long after that Tim said we were close to the exit, and I took a deep breath. He said we'd have to climb a bit to get out, but I did not mind. Finally, we reached an opening. There was a rock wall we would have to scale to climb out, but luckily it wasn't too steep. And just as I was bracing myself for the climb, I heard my name. It was coming from back inside the tunnels. I stopped to listen, and I heard it again more clearly this time. The familiar sound of it made my blood run cold. It sounded like Sky, my sister. My sister who never came home. I turned, and I began walking towards her voice, calling out to her. And Tim practically tackled me. And for someone who looked 6 years old, this kid was extremely strong. I protested, crying, telling him I just wanted to see my sister. I escaped his grip, and I ran towards Sky's voice. I imagined embracing her as she cried on my shoulder, telling me how much she missed me. And I would tell her that I was going to get us out of this horrible, godforsaken place and call our parents to tell them that she was alive. I didn't see anyone as I walked towards the voice, but I couldn't stop. She sounded so close, and I kept calling out to her until I saw something move in the darkness. And I ran as fast as my injured leg would let me. But as I came closer, I saw that it was far too tall to be in the sky. It was too tall to be anything human. I heard heavy breathing. It came closer, until I could make out that it was 8 feet tall in the light and coming down from the exit. This thing looked vaguely similar to a deer. Its coat was mangy, and some ribs were exposed, almost like it had begun to rot. I recognized it from the book on my desk. I can still smell it. It was like roadkill baking on a summer day. This thing shambled closer, still using my sister's voice to call me. I couldn't move. Its coat was the color of her hair. Tim grabbed me then, pulling me to the exit. He hoisted me up the rock face. I scrambled up as fast as I could, with Tim helping my injured leg from below. Even halfway up, I could still smell that thing. The overpowering stench of it, and my leg screaming in pain, was starting to cloud my mind. We were nearly to the top, when I lost my grip and fell. My head hit the ground hard. I couldn't move, and I was drifting in and out of consciousness. Jason, Tim said, trying to shake me awake. I wondered how he got down so fast before everything went black. When I opened my eyes, it was daytime. Buddy. Hey, buddy, can you hear me? A police officer stood over me. He introduced himself as Officer Hill. I was in the woods, laying on the ground. I didn't know where I was, but there wasn't a pit anywhere near us. I sat up. My leg was still injured, but wasn't bandaged. I heard the officer on a walkie-talkie saying something about EMS. I still felt dizzy and very confused. I tried to tell the officer as much as I could, without sounding, totally crazy. And it was then that I realized that Tim was nowhere to be seen. I asked him if he'd seen a small boy with me, but the officer just shook his head. He said a couple of hikers spotted me off trail. I was reported missing over 2 days ago, and they had search parties everywhere out looking for me. No one had seen any sign of a boy. The paramedics arrived shortly after that, and I was beyond thankful to just get out of there. But as they were loading me up to the ambulance, a man approached the officer who'd been helping me. I overheard him say something about how his son ran away, and I recognized the flannel immediately. I stopped the EMTs, and I yelled out to the officer, warning him not to believe the man. The officer looked at him, then back at me, and I heard him mutter something to one of the EMTs about a head injury. I begged them to listen if they wouldn't, and instead they shot me full of sedatives and carted me off. Officer Hill went missing shortly after. They've never found him. As for Tim, I only hope that someday maybe he'll learn to use his mother's magic. I'm still with the service, so he knows where to find me, and I owe him one. So if he's ever ready to fight back, I'll be there with him. Every time we talk, he has something new to report. All the UFO sightings last year made him go bonkers. Once he told me he was close to decrypting something called the Voynich manuscript. I'm a little skeptical, but whatever. He thinks there may be advanced civilizations living at the bottom of the sea that we haven't discovered yet. When he talks about this stuff, I usually just nod. It's not really my thing. But a few weeks ago, he suggested we go for a hike in a nearby nature reserve. Okay, was all I said to that. We drove for about 45 minutes. I probably don't spend as much time in nature as I should. Tiago loves nature. He's always talking about how nature is so much stronger and smarter than humans. I find that intimidating, but it's probably true. He stopped the car at a little spot off the road that didn't even have a parking lot. A dirt path led into the trees. He grabbed the picnic basket and asked me to grab a cooler. "How far are we going?" I asked. "Not far," he said, and started down the path. I followed him, looking around constantly. I trust Tiago, but if I got lost out here, I wanted to be able to find my way back. These woods are full of cedar trees. I heard somewhere that each leaf of a cedar tree has the vitamin C of 4 oranges. That's a lot of vitamin C. We stopped by a large rock overlooking a slope through the trees. I could see a narrow river with no footbridge. People must not have come out there very often. Though it was beautiful, I knew Tiago had another reason for bringing me here. So he said, "How's the sandwich?" "It's fine," I said. "Can we talk?" "We are talking." You know what I mean. I took a long drink of my iced tea and then looked him in the eye. "What's this about?" "Well, do you notice anything weird about this place?" He replied, "Other than the fact that we're miles from anywhere with no one in sight?" "No. There's a trail a mile back," he interrupted. We drove past it. There's plenty of people on it. There's another trail a mile up the road, but it doesn't cross with this one. Doesn't that seem weird? I don't know. Maybe people just don't like this trail as much, I replied. "Do you like it?" "Well, I've barely seen it. We've only done like half a mile. You know how some trails have those little things at the start that say what animals and how far the trail is? Like they give you the history of the park and stuff," he asked. "Yes," I said. "Why? Do you see any of that here? Maybe there's nothing interesting about this spot." "Oh yes, there is. I'll show you." We finished eating. He told me to follow him down the slope. It was steep. I almost lost my balance several times and would have turned back, except that something about this spot did seem strange to me. For one thing, it was cooler out here than it should have been. It was the height of summer, but I still needed my jacket. When I listened closely, I swore I could hear a metallic clicking, as if there was a huge clock nearby. There was no machinery in sight. We reached the bottom of the slope. I thought Diego would lead me to the river, but instead he showed me to a small cave, running into the side of the rock that we just sat on top of. A trickle of water from the river ran into its mouth. I couldn't see anything inside. The light only penetrated about 5 or 10 feet, but there was no mistaking it that the clicking came from inside the cave. "What's that sound?" I said. "I don't know." said Tiago. He pulled the flashlight out of his pocket. I want to find out, though. Tiago, I said. This is crazy. If there's something in there, I'm sure somebody else knows about it. Aliens wouldn't just land in a cave and try not to cover it up or anything. Tiago picked up a rock and threw it into the cave. I heard it hit a wall. I stepped into the cave using my phone for light. The cave reached a dead end after about 30 feet, yet the whirring and clicking was louder than ever. I looked around. The sound must have been coming through a crack in the rocks, except I couldn't find one. Tiago followed me into the cave. He kept setting his feet down louder than he needed to. Eventually, he stopped. He tapped his foot on the rock just to be sure. It sounded hollow. Is something down there? I asked. Tiago stared down at the hollow rock. I didn't really know the guy, he said. We met at a con. He said he was from around here. When I asked him if he knew about any good hiking spots, he told me about this little girl who went missing at a campsite. She went camping with her family and just wandered off. Her sister woke up in the middle of the night and saw her leaving the tent, thinking she was going to the bathroom. But they wake up in the morning and she hasn't come back. The tent was still open, but she didn't even take her shoes, he said. Did she come here? I don't know. This guy from the con, he was on the search party. They never found her, but he found this cave. He told me about the sound in here and said you can only hear it at a certain time of the day and not every day. Maybe they just come to visit sometimes. Who? I asked. He picked up a rock the size of a basketball and knelt over the hollow spot in the rock. He raised the rock over his head. It's time to find out. Stop, said a little girl's voice. Tiago and I looked at the entrance. A girl stood there watching us. She came closer. I noticed that she wasn't wearing shoes. I guessed her to be about 12. Are you the girl? Asked Tiago. I saw your picture of your family. The girl shook her head. She stepped to the left wall of the cave and started tapping on it with her knuckles. If you want to get down there, you don't go through the floor, she said. I mean, you can, but the fall will kill you. So, how do we get in? I asked. You don't get in, said the girl. More like it gets you. What? I said. She picked up a small rock and threw it at the ceiling. The sound it made as it hit was like a knock on a door. The ceiling was empty too. After the rock hit, rumbling sounded above us. That's where they are, she said. You have to be careful. If you try to get in before they let you, you can die. The rumbling was getting louder. The whole cave started shaking. I was thinking we should get out. Pebbles and dirt were falling from the ceiling. I started towards the mouth, but Tiago grabbed my shoulder. We've come this far, he said. I want to find out where it goes. The little girl came towards us as the rumbling grew louder. I was sure we'd get crushed by something falling on us. Instead, the ceiling split open and fell away from us as if gravity had reversed itself. My mouth fell open. The three of us were sucked into the chasm. We were falling up. I didn't know how any of this was possible. As we flew upwards into the opening that should have taken us through the top of the rock we just sat on, I felt Tiago's grip on my shoulder. I'd heard stories of people who'd wandered off into the woods and been found miles away with no dirt on them or footprints showing how they got there. This little girl had survived for a year in the woods without shoes or even dirtying her clothes. Well, we were going to find out where this rabbit hole led together. We didn't fall for very long. After a few seconds, we emerged into a larger cavern and slowed just before we hit the ground. We landed with the force of someone setting a plate down on a table. I stood up and looked around. Above me was a rocky ceiling. For a second, it rippled like the surface of a lake, and then it solidified. Tiago stood up. There's light. Where's it coming from? Somewhere in the center, I said. The floor was uneven, but we climbed over the jagged rock formations. Though we moved at the same speed, Tiago got to the center a few seconds before I did. I couldn't figure that out. When I caught up with him, I saw a pool on the floor with something glowing under the surface. Whatever it was bright enough to fairly illuminate the whole space. It's very peaceful, said Tiago, almost like we're dead. Where's the girl? I said. I'm right here, said a voice above and to the side. We looked and saw her walking down the wall of the cavern, like gravity was pulling her in a different direction. She stepped from the wall to the floor and stood level with us. What happened? How'd you get here? I said. I walked, she replied. Are we in another dimension? Asked Tiago. Is that why gravity works differently here? Well, it works differently for me, she said. I don't think you should try walking on the walls. Who are you? I asked. Marita, she said. Pleased to meet you. How do you know about this place? Asked Tiago. Marita didn't answer. She just walked past us and over to the pool. I thought she'd dip a toe into the water, but instead she just looked into the glowing orb under the surface. I couldn't look at it directly. It was like the sun, but she didn't seem to mind the intensity of the light. It's weird, she said. When I was little, my mom would read me picture books. I always wished I could take the characters out of the books and make them real so I could play with them. But my mom said I couldn't do that because they were just pictures. What a weird thing to say to a little kid. Is this place like one of those books? I asked. You're missing the point, she said. You can't take the cat in the hat out of the book because he's two-dimensional. We're three-dimensional. He's not meant for this space. What are you saying? Said Tiago. That we're in a four-dimensional space? Is that why you can walk on walls? The guys who built the machine, she said. They're in 4 dimensions. That's why you couldn't see what was making that sound. It's above you. Well, not above, but like above you in a way that you don't have a word for. Could you see it? I said. She nodded. Can you describe it to me? Well, it looks kind of like a typewriter crossed with a grandfather clock, she said, with a big pendulum that swings. Well, not below it, but below it, in a way that we don't have a word for, Tiago interrupted. You're getting it, she said. What's the point of all this? I asked. Did they bring us here on purpose, or are we just in their way? I was about to ask another question, but then the ground underneath me shifted. There wasn't any rumbling or anything. The rocks just slid underneath my feet, as if I were moonwalking over them. Tiago was now directly above me. The walls, ceiling, and floor of the cave had mixed together like different paint colors and became indistinguishable. The pool in the center was now a stream branching off in all directions, with a glow emanating from every branch. Maria had not moved at all. I felt as if we were on the inside of a globe with me standing on top, Tiago standing on the bottom, and Marita standing in the center. They're shifting it, said Marita. It's like how if you try to map out the world on a flat surface, you can't do it without distorting the size and shape of everything. The only way to show it accurately is to put it on a globe. Well, I hope they don't do it again, I said. This is a little too weird. I can hear the clicking again, said Tiago. I must be close to it. You're never far away, said Merida. What's so special about that cave? I asked. Is it the only place in the world like that? It's not, said Tiago. I did some research. There's other places like it. There's one in the Philippines, also 2 in Russia. It's just like this. There's a clicking sometimes, and people go missing near there, but not very often, so nobody notices anything's wrong. It's so weird, I said. I mean, reality's like this for them. They can just move stuff around. Are you intimidated? Asked Marita. A little, I said. Do you like it? Is that why you stay with them? I stay here because it's the only place I belong, she replied. But I like to visit your dimensions too, sometimes. Well, I said, this is interesting, but I think it's time to go. And then my surroundings changed again. This time I was sitting in a tree 50 feet off the ground. I looked around. The forest did not look like the one I'd just been in. It was very cold. I guessed that I was somewhere far north of my home. I tried to move gingerly, but the branch underneath me broke. I was falling, and when I was about 10 feet from the ground, I plunged into a body of water, knocking the wind out of me. Light blinded me. I shut my eyes. I tried to swim towards the surface, but I had no idea where it was. Somebody grabbed me and pulled me with them. We broke the surface of the water. My rescuer pulled me onto the ground and asked if I was okay. I recognized Tiago's voice. My leg, I said once I'd regained my breath. I was back in the cavern. It had its original layout with a pool with the orb in the center. I not feel any heat while underwater. The orb gave off light, but not warmth. I pulled up the right leg of my jeans. Tiago leaned forward. It's not broken, he said. Can you walk? In a minute, I said. What happened? They don't like it when you say the word, said Merida. You were about to say it. It starts with H. Well, that's bullshit, I said. If they think. Don't, said Merida, her voice barely more than a whisper. You know what's crazy? Said Tiago. A lot of unsolved mysteries have really obvious explanations. Do you remember Malaysian Flight 370? Vaguely, I said. Did they ever figure out what happened? Well, probably the pilot crashed it on purpose. He said he was sick, he just wanted to die. But this isn't obvious, said Tiago. If you told me it was four-dimensional beings that took the girl and lived in this cavern, I don't know what I would have said. I thought you liked that stuff. I said I did. I mean, I do. But you're right. We don't belong here. I don't know if they'll let you, said Merida. Why not? I asked. Are they afraid we'll tell everyone? Do you want us to stay? Tiago suddenly asked Merida. Her posture stiffened. I mean, I don't care, but you're lonely, I said. You don't want to go back to your family, but you hate not having any people here to talk to. Nobody brought you here, said Merida. You found a cave, but you brought us here, said Tiago, gesturing at his surroundings. Merida put her hands on her forehead. It was the most vulnerable I'd ever seen her look. I can't go back, she said. It's not just my family. I live in 4 dimensions. I can't go back to 3. It's just not right. Will you stay here? Please? Tiago and I shook our heads. We have to go back, I said. I stopped myself before using the H word. Well, then you have to talk to them, she said, because I can't open the ceiling. I'm sorry. Where are they? I asked. She pointed into the water. I looked at the glowing orb. The light didn't hurt my eyes as much, but that didn't mean I wanted to swim down there. With some difficulty, I stood up. Tiago was right. This would feel a little like dying. Merida looked disappointed. I think she was expecting us to stay with her forever. Maybe being in 4 dimensions also stunts your emotions. I approached the water. The orb was essentially a perfectly spherical light bulb. No visible cracks or dents anywhere. I wondered how many other people had found their way here. Did the orb let anyone go back? I stepped into the water. It was lukewarm. Just before my head went underwater, I stopped. What do I tell them? I said, tell them they can't just hold us prisoners, said Tiago. It's not right. I dove under the surface and swam down towards the orb. The water didn't bother my eyes, although it was now very hard to tell which way was up. It looked like the surface was in every direction. Somehow I didn't feel the need to come back up for air. The orb was right in front of me. I came closer. I'm not sure if I touched the orb or if it reached out to me. All I knew is that I was now sitting at the table in my living room. I was fully dressed and able to breathe. The refrigerator door closed and my 5th grade teacher, Mr. Ford, came into the room carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. How have you been? He asked me as he sat across from me and set 1 glass in front of me. Bubbles came from my mouth as I spoke. This was too weird. I was still underwater, but experiencing all of this. What were Tiago and Merida seeing right now? It's peach tea, said Mr. Ford as he took a sip. Your favorite. I took a sip. It was good. He even knew that I liked it without sweetener. Are you them? I asked. He looked confused. The 4-dimensional people. Is this how you talk to us? This place looks like my home. This is your home, said Mr. Ford. He was a stocky, red-headed man with a beard. If you walk out your front door, you can say hi to your neighbors. I think they're just getting home. Will they see that I'm making bubbles? They'll probably just think you have the hiccups. What do you want? I asked. I mean, why any of this? Why come to Earth? You're asking me, he said. I'm just your old teacher. Okay, he said with a half smile. He did not smile like my old teacher. The truth is, we don't know what to make of you guys. Of what? Humans. Yeah, I mean, some of us think we should just leave you alone. And some of us think maybe you've got something to teach us. What about Marita? She's a special case, he said. I don't know how, but she found her way to us. It's not the first time, actually. Maybe that's why we keep coming here. What's that ticking sound? You mean, what's the machine do? It's how we get around. We travel through different dimensions. The machine helps us figure out where we're going, when we're going. I finished my iced tea. See, most of the time, if aliens are coming to Earth, people think it's either to study us or invade. You sound like you can't make up your mind. Well, we're not really aliens. He sipped his iced tea. I looked out the window. The side of the house on the right was visible, but not the front. I couldn't hear anything from where I sat, but that didn't mean the neighbors weren't home. The old man didn't have conversations on his porch as often as he used to. What are you thinking? Asked Mr. Ford. I'm thinking about what I'm going to do now that I know you guys are out there, I said. I don't know who will believe me. I mean, I've had some pretty crazy shit happen to me, but now I know that well, whatever you say you are, you're not from Earth. I guess you don't want us to know about you. Mr. Ford sipped his iced tea again. Sometimes he acted like my teacher, and sometimes not. The way he steepled his fingers as I spoke was a perfect imitation. You gotta send us back, I said. Marita can stay with you. She'll be fine, but Tiago and I, we have families and stuff. Mr. Ford stood up suddenly. He knocked over his glass, causing the remainder of the iced tea to spill over the tabletop. I could hear my neighbor's door open. It will be getting dark soon. See, that's the thing I don't get, said Mr. Ford. All traces of my 5th grade teacher were gone now. He was acting like an alien. When he put his hand to his forehead, his wrist bent in a strange way that was different than a human's would have. We can take you to the edge of the universe, hundreds of billions of galaxies. It would take you longer than your planet has existed to go to all of them. Even if you could travel at the speed of light, which you can't. But you and Tiago have families. Well, yeah, I said. I mean, no kids. I'm not married, but I want kids someday. You people live, what, 80 years if you're lucky? What if I told you I was so old I don't even know what a year is? Don't you want that? Can you do that? I asked. Make me immortal. Marita's. He replied, I don't know. She's not aging. He said she's maturing, but not getting older. I've never seen a human do that. Maybe we can do that with you. Your grandparents didn't get to see 90. I can show you 900. My grandmother lived a good life, I said. That's all she needed. All I need, I think. Mr. Ford sighed. Fine, he said. But first I want to see something. I was standing right in front of him. A second ago, I'd been standing across the table from him. Now we were inches apart. He wrapped one hand around my neck and raised the other hand with the index finger out. He plunged the finger into my forehead. It hurt, but maybe that was a good sign. If it had killed me, I wouldn't feel anything. I flashed back to my grandmother's death. She was 88. Her health had been failing for a long time. By the time we made it to her bedside, she was on life support. I held her hand for a moment. She was still warm. I didn't say anything. I hoped she could feel me there somehow. Mr. Ford withdrew his finger, and I was back underwater. My lungs were about to burst, and I couldn't tell which way was up. I felt someone grab me by the arm. Tiago. We broke the surface, and I gasped. Once again, Tiago pulled me to the shore. Marita stood there watching us. You okay? Asked Tiago. Yeah, I said. They said we could go. Marita pointed to the wall. I realized she was telling us to walk up it in the same way she'd walked down it. Are you going to be okay? I asked her. I'll manage, she said. What did you see while I was down there? I asked. The water turned into a kaleidoscope, she said. We couldn't see you until you came back. Just a bunch of crystals. I looked at Tiago. He nodded. Walking up the walls proved as simple as placing one foot against a stone and leaning into it. Somehow gravity shifted with us. We were still wet by the time we reached the car. "Are you going to tell anyone about this?" I asked. "I'll post about it." He replied, "No one will believe it if we tell the full story, but we should tell it. Let the truth get out there." I arrived home to find two empty glasses on my dining room table. One was on its side and some liquid had stained the finish. I heard through social media that Mr. Ford had died in a car accident. As I was going through some old knickknacks, I found the last birthday card my grandmother sent me before she died. I could have sworn that I threw it out. I know those were the only words on the inside. It was definitely her handwriting. I'm not sure what to make of the knowledge that there are four-dimensional beings out there that are baffled by us. If I ever see my grandmother again, though, maybe I'll ask her what she thinks. When I was a kid, my mom used to take me to the community pool all the time. She'd spend the afternoon doing water aerobics with the other moms, while me and the other kids played in the shallow end. It was a nice place, plenty of slides, pool noodles, and colorful murals. There was even a little jungle cave area where they had water jets making the water bubble. There were a couple of colored lights and a little speaker playing jungle sounds. Parrots, elephants, tigers. To my 6-year-old mind, that was my favorite place in the world. However, it wasn't constructed very well. Once, when I was sitting in there, a piece of the concrete wall came off. A disc-shaped slice of concrete struck me at the base of my skull, knocking me out like an off switch. I have little painful glimpses of memory from being underwater, looking at the blinding green light while my lungs refused to listen. They didn't notice me until the blood came out the other end, thanks to the water jets. I was without air for about 4.5 minutes before they got the water out of my lungs. That's how I lost my sense of taste. Ageusia, I think they call it. It's the one piece of brain damage that is permanent from that accident. In every other way, I'm fine, but it's strange how much such a small thing can affect you. For example, the last thing I remember tasting was a piece of strawberry mint gum that my mom handed me in the changing room. I still remember it after all these years. And whenever I see something colored, a combination of pink and green, that taste comes to mind. I can still feel different textures, and some textures are better than others, but I can't differentiate sweet from sour or salty. I can also feel spice to a degree. That's not a taste that just kind of hurts. After the accident, my family couldn't stay. Mom got in a nasty legal battle with the local municipality. We moved from Chowder Blinds, New England, all the way to the town of Juniper, UV. My dad got a job with sheet metal, while my mom worked part-time at a travel agency. The change was devastating to my budding social life, but by the time I got to high school, I was just another face in the crowd. My New England accent was buried deep. High school can be rough for anyone, but for a tasteless kid in the early 2000s, it was downright violent. I wouldn't notice how some asshole dropped dishwater powder into my food until I got sick during recess. They just watched me shovel it down, bite, 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 and laugh. I once made the mistake of saying that I loved classic Coke. I know, I just wanted to say something relatable. Turns out I was given a red cup of Dr. Pepper. I couldn't tell them apart. And from that day forward, I was Classic Coke, or CC, a name that mutated into various slurs over time. I want to tell you about my last year of high school. It was early autumn. We'd all been ordered to the indoor pool, where we'd be spending our next 3 PE sessions doing CPR training and swimming exercises. I was banking hard on being allowed to skip it. Not only because I didn't want my classmates to see me in my swim trunks, but because I'm not very fond of water. Standing in it, or even near it, it makes me hyper-aware of my breathing, and my heart starts racing. It's not even a conscious thing, it just happens. Trying to suppress it just makes it worse. I guess you could call it a sort of mild phobia or something psychosomatic. But yeah, no, I wasn't allowed to skip it. My gym teacher, Mr. Bauer, wouldn't even talk about it without a doctor's note. Appealing to his kinder nature was not going to get me anywhere. And since I hadn't brought my own swim gear, I had to use loaners. Not only were they way too big for me, but they've been lying in a box for at least a couple of years, I think. How the hell does fabric get crusty? Anyway, our first session was predictably awful. I stepped out in my cherry purple loaner trunks that reached way past my knees. We started out with a couple of CPR exercises on a training dummy. I was selected to go first since I couldn't taste the plastic anyway. It was a different time. After that, there were swimming exercises. While my classmates finished their exercise in the deep end as intended, I just couldn't do it. I had to stick to the shallow end with the kids' stuff. There was even one of those big mouth Billy bass toys that got triggered every time I swam past. Every time that jingle started playing, it got a big laugh out of someone. Take me to the river, a mechanical fish would sing. Drop me in the water. I asked Mr. Bauer moved it, but he just urged me to finish without making such a fuss. Yeah, the second session was even worse. I was forced to swim in the deep end, and I had some kind of panic attack. I remember this intense sensation of the air not being enough and my lungs feeling like they just couldn't fill. I owe for help. Mr. Bauer had to drag me to the shallow end where I clung to him like a scared cat. I couldn't look at my classmates after that. They, however, invented a couple new nicknames. CC, as it turns out, rhymes with both PP and wee wee. Some kind person suggested that I probably was so scared that I pissed myself. I didn't, for the record. But that didn't stop them from suggesting that I did. Needless to say, there was no way in hell I'd ever go to that third session. The morning of the third session, I had chugged some dish soap and I threw up in the bathroom. I couldn't taste it anyway. Might as well have been orange juice. My mom called me in sick and I got to spend the day at home. I think she figured out I was faking it, but maybe she realized that if I was ready to drink dish soap to get out of something, it must be really bad. Either way, I had a great day. I watched movies, listened to music, and I caught up on my comic books. The kind of thing you save for a rainy day. When I got back to class the next day, I was told I had to finish the mandatory third session at a later date. But by the grace of God, the pool was shut down before I got the chance. Turns out there was some kind of groundwater leak thanks to a small geological event. The water was tested positive for parasites. Nothing serious, but something you shouldn't be swimming in. Might get bug bites. Now this is where things started to take a strange turn. A few of my classmates were taken in by the police for breaking into the pool area at night. No one really thought too much about it since just kids being kids. But I could see something was up. They weren't looking for a place to party. They had the Mastersons' house for that, one of the rich kids whose dad was out of town 6 days a week. So I started paying attention to the whispers in the halls. There's nothing outright wrong, but I'd pick up little bits and bobs that hinted at something going down. There were these two kids in a basketball team that I picked up a couple of whispers from outside the gym. "You're going to see her?" One of them whispered. "Yeah, the first chance I got," he laughed back. "I can't wait. They're going to be watching the place. Just people going in and out," another responded. "They won't notice if we go in by day and stay the night." My classmates started to behave. This might not seem like such a big deal, but they were paying attention in class, answering questions, and then retreating to the dark corners of the school to plot and whisper. Something was clearly up, but I wasn't in a clique close enough to the action. Still, it made me worried. The most obvious proof of this came to me during a math class. As Miss Levinson walked us through a couple of handy techniques, one of my classmates suddenly stood up. Everyone turned to him. "Is there a problem, Ron?" Miss Levinson asked. "Do you mind?" He just looked at her and raised his hand as if he was about to ask for permission. And then he made this awful noise and threw up all over the floor. The others looked at him with disgust, but it wasn't disgust about what he'd done. It looked like they'd been offended. I overheard one of the girls from the yearbook club whisper to her friend. "Okay, he's out," she said. "She doesn't want him." There were other signs, too. Some of the core cliques were reaching out to new people, even sophomores and freshmen. People were getting invited to hang out, and more of them were being suckered into something I couldn't quite put my finger on. It was related to the pool area. Whatever it was going down there, and that much was clear. The final nail in the coffin for me was in the locker room ahead of basketball practice. One of the guys, Morris, took out what looked like a metal snuff box. It was full of this dark purple, like powder. He licked his thumb, dipped it, and ran it across his tongue. One of his buddies turned to him, astonished. They spoke in low voices. "That shit works?" "Yeah, it's like I can hear her, man. It's like she's there." I wanted to ask him about it, but I couldn't bring myself to do it if they wanted me in on it. They'd have reached out to me already. I'd see them bring these strange things to put in their lockers. One guy brought a bag of fertilizer. Another had a couple sleeping bags. Some of the girls brought frogs from a nearby pond and flowers. A lot of flowers, tulips, petunias, violets, even some novelty blue sunflowers from the train station gift shop. They'd stuff away entire bouquets into their lockers, and the next day, they'd be gone. They were bringing things in, but nothing was going out. So where was it going? I wanted to check the pool out for myself, but I didn't get the chance. Teachers were keeping an eye on the place during the day, and there were cops going by at night. So while students were clearly getting in somehow, I was not in the loop. This all happened really fast. A couple of weeks at most. Some people had changed rather radically. For example, there was this guy named Everett. He'd been an absolute pain in the ass for people in his class, and all of a sudden, he was a model student. He even addressed his teachers as sir and ma'am. It got to the point where people suspected trouble at home, but there was nothing of the sort. He just changed. And while others weren't sure as to how or why, I had a sneaking suspicion that it had to do with that closed-off pool. There were too many things congregating in that one area for it to be a coincidence, and I knew for a fact that Everett was one of the people that had been invited early on. So finally I bit the bullet. Once after class, I walked up to some of the more sympathetic girls in the yearbook class. They looked at me like I was an alien. "Hey," I said, "are any of you going to the pool?" "It's closed," they replied. "Don't you know that?" Yeah, but I looked around, making sure no one overheard us. "I know some people go there anyway." "You do that, right? Why do you even want to go? Aren't you, like, scared of water?" No, I just want to see what's up. Everyone's going, right?" I asked. "Yeah, no, not everyone." "Not you, for example," she replied. So much for them being the nicer people in class. Some of the others stayed late after class under the guise of catching up. Teachers allowed it and even encouraged it. I figured they'd use that excuse to sneak into the pool, but I had no way of knowing for sure. I couldn't make up a good excuse to stay late myself. Since I was ahead in most classes, I had to do the opposite and end up in detention. So I cheated on a quiz, copying the answers from my desk mate, and I did not even try to hide it. School looks different in the dark, eerie. The corridors look longer, and the lack of people buzzing about makes every footstep echo. When I was done with my detention, I managed to sneak off to see if I could find the others. Going past the pool, I could tell the door was locked. There was a warning tape on the front, unbroken. They hadn't gotten in that way. As I was skulking about, I turned to see a figure at the end of the hall, the ex-Menace Everett. He walked up to me, looking me up and down with curiosity. "What you up to?" he asked. "I just want to see what you guys are doing," I said. "You're in there, right?" "You sure?" He replied. "I don't know. I'm just curious." "Yeah, I get that. But you gotta be sure," he insisted. "Once you're in, you're in." "Well, how can I be sure if I don't?" "I'm asking you, Cece." He interrupted. "If you're sure, you don't sound very sure to me." We just looked at one another for a while. He was taking this seriously and was asking me to do the same. I obliged. "Yeah," I nodded. "I'm sure." He took me to the janitor's closet and onward through a floor hatch. There was an old maintenance hall that handled the water flow for most of the school, and the pipes ran back out through the pool area. The space was so thin I had to walk sideways to get through, but at the end of it was this locker-sized door that led straight into the pool area. Stepping out, I didn't know what to say. The plastic cover of the pool was gone, leaving the water open. They'd covered most of the bottom of the pool in dirt, and there were flowers littered all over the water. The water itself had taken on a sort of purple tint. There were electric lanterns lining the edge of the pool, and about 2 dozen students chatting, swimming, and playing. Everett grabbed my arm. The others looked up at me, some curious, most of them confused. "First off, you gotta take a dip," he said. "That's step one. But it's closed." "Are you?" "You just gotta," he interrupted. "Strip down, right?" "I'm not gonna." "You said you were sure," he interrupted again. "This is you showing me you're sure." "Okay, now strip." So I did. I just got my last sock off when one of the guys from the basketball team grabbed my other arm. The onlookers cheered as I was dragged to the pool. "We got a new one," they laughed. "Throw in." "She's gonna love you," another said. Deep diving into bacteria-infested waters withstanding, I wasn't eager to go head first into the deep end. I asked them to slow down and hear me out, but it fell on deaf ears. Seconds later, I was pushed in. A moment of perfect silence. Then I broke through the water. Flower petals stuck to me, and I could feel the grains of dirt scrub against my skin. The water was so dark that I could barely see my own hands beneath the surface. The others were gathering around to watch, giggling eagerly. Something brushed against my leg. I came up gasping for air. I swam towards the shallow end, shoving petals and debris aside. Everyone just waited and watched. "Here she comes." Girl grinned. "You think she's gonna like him?" I didn't see anything or anyone as I continued to the shallow end. The moment my feet touched the dirt, there was a sound, a strange mechanical sound. Looking up, I noticed the big mouth-billy bass fish swinging its tail back and forth at the end of the pool. Something had triggered it. There was movement, something dredging up grime. Bubbles popped, and there was a splash somewhere behind me. As I turned around, I could see ripples in the water. I could feel the waves move as something pushed its way forward. My heart raised as I looked up at the smiling faces. What the hell are they happy about? What is this? And then something grabbed my leg. It was so unexpected. I barely had the time to gulp for air as something pulled me beneath the water. I only caught a glimpse of it, a long worm-like body moving out of view. Every segment as thick as my arm and as wide as my torso. Burst through the surface, and beeline for the edge of the pool. But they weren't letting me out. "I told you he couldn't do it," someone said. "He's going to screw it all up." "Kick him back. He needs to stay longer," someone else said. "What's wrong with him?" The kids kicked at me, pushing me back down. No matter where I looked, there was someone there to fight me. I could feel hands. A worm-like body brushed against my back as it squirmed past me. Then it grabbed my feet and pulled me under again. It had been swimming around me, clearing out the grime of the water. It pulled me to the bottom of the pool, making my ears pop. This thing, it was at least 25 to 30 feet long. It had a slight purple color which seemed to affect the water around it as it moved. It had bent itself in a sort of C shape where the bottom half had me grabbed and the top half faced me. It had no head. I was staring into an open neck like the mouth of a lamprey, vibrating beak like teeth in perfect formation, undulating back and forth with each passing heartbeat. Randomly spaced across its body were these thin, twig-like arms, ending with 3 web fingers. These were what grabbed me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Every bone in my body wanted to fight my way out. I was convinced these people had thrown me in to be eaten, a sacrifice to whatever the hell this was supposed to be. Was this her? The one they've been referring to? It had to be. There were vibrations coming from it. I could feel them, but the more I listened, I slowly came to realize that it wasn't just vibrations. They were the sounds of voices. I clawed my way to the surface, kicking and screaming. They let me go. I breached the surface, screaming for help, crying, begging for it, and again everyone just laughed. Some seemed genuinely confused. I waded towards the shallow end, watching the segmented body wriggle just under the surface. The others gathered around the edges of the pool, ready to kick me back in. Turning back towards the thing, it suddenly rose out of the water like an angered cobra, closing in at alarming speed. It came up to me face to face. "Damn," someone muttered. "You just can't. You know, it's gorgeous." Not even one of them reacted as I thought they would. They were praising it, complimenting it, speaking about it like it was the most beautiful thing in the world. The guys were drooling, and the girls were awestruck. They all gathered around to see what I'd do. It closed in on me. 6 little twig-like hands touched my arms and my chest, feeling my pounding heart. Carefully, it descended under the surface again. This time it gently pushed on my head, just enough for my ears to go under the water while keeping my mouth above the surface so I could breathe. It was speaking. I could hear it in the vibrations. "Listen," it said. "Listen, please." It was the most surreal moment of my life. Lying there, belly up in front of a spellbound crowd, like a nightmare I'd never had. Feeling the poking and prodding fingers against my back, my thighs, my arms. "You don't see me?" it asked. "Yes, I see you," I replied. "You see other me." "Not me." The segmented body bumped against me as it moved under, then beyond. The vibrations were clear, but a little more distant. "You're not affected," it continued. "You are faulty." I don't understand," I said. "I can't live on your tongue." It vibrated. "I can't help you." I lay there for at least 10 minutes, just feeling the vibrations. The others relaxed. Some even jumped in with me, seemingly unafraid. There's no word for this thing. It was just her. It didn't want a name. It didn't need one. She was frustrated. She seemed to have a strange effect on the others that just didn't work on me. I didn't understand why. It didn't either. That is, until I explained my lack of taste. See, a human tongue has thousands of taste receptors, allowing us to translate complex sensations for our minds to register. Apparently, this is the way she could affect others, by having them taste her. I was told a story. There was a cave with hundreds of kin in the dark. All you could use to find and discern others was taste and vibration, which was all it could utilize then. There had been pressure coming from beneath, a breach pressing dozens of kin to strange, lonely waters. There she had looked for others, only to find herself sucked into a pipe. She'd been stuck in there for days, just wriggling around, listening to us other living beings, learning and adapting. She managed to make her way into the pool, which had been closed by then. The water was bad, but not anywhere near what she was used to. Chlorine was common in her home. It wasn't until a couple of students broke in to swim that she realized the effect she could have on us. The substance she used to communicate with others of her kin was intoxicating to humans, making us experience a dream like high and more. But without taste, I couldn't translate that sensation. All I could do was listen. By the time I stood up, I looked at the others around the pool. They spoke in unison. "She lives with us," they said. "We listen." They stretched their arms out, ready to pull me in. I couldn't see her the way they did, but I was still a part of this. I was in on the secret. I was in the know with the others. And I'll be honest, it felt kind of good. Terrifying, yes, but kind of good. For the next couple of weeks, I was a part of it. A government-assigned official came by to check the waters, and a couple of students pushed them in. Once in, they were as infatuated by her as everyone else. They were eager and willing to lie to keep the secret, shutting the pool down for the foreseeable future. I talked a lot about her with the others. To them, she was this gorgeous, otherworldly human woman. Like a fairy tale siren or mermaid, they couldn't even put her in words. It was just this thing that she was. I tried explaining how I saw her, but they couldn't grasp the idea in a way. I think they found it offensive. It was about a week before Christmas when I saw Ron coming down the corridor, the guy who'd stood up and vomited in class. I asked the girl from the yearbook club about him, seeing if she knew what this was about. "If you're not worthy, she hurts you," she said. "She kicks you out. That's how she does it." "By making you sick?" I asked. "No, by pushing out everything she's given you," she corrected. "It just looks nasty, is all." It all started to make sense. The purple powder I'd seen the basketball players with was just from the pool water. Tasting it would give them a bit of a leftover high, like swimming with her. And swimming with her they did. I usually stayed out, but on nights when I came to see her, the others would flock into the water. The massive worm would wriggle between them, brushing against them as it went. People would laugh and play, hugging her and each other. It was like watching a human snake pit with that one thing moving between them. At first, I loved it. I loved being a part of something, but I wasn't. Not really. It started with Everett. I noticed lines. Long, thin lines along his arms, like the segments of a worm. His gums were looking a bit purple, and his eyes were red. You could barely tell at a glance, but if you spent some time with him, it was obvious. I had seen it in the others. Someone had grown extra teeth. Another one had their nose shrunk. One of the girls had her fingers grow another 3 inches. Everett eventually stopped coming to class. He'd just sit by the pool all day. His hair had fallen out, along with his nails and teeth. He'd grown a new set and didn't need his old ones. They started to feed her mostly fish, but she didn't shy away from raw meat either. She'd just suck it into her gullet. I'd watch the teeth chomp down in a circular motion, grinding the flesh to a mush for her to drink. There was a rumor going around. The remaining unaffected staff and students were all going to be dragged into the pool at once. There was going to be an uprising. It wasn't really talked about. It was just sort of felt by those involved. Collective subliminal thought. Not me, though. I was assumed compliant for now. Some brought zip ties and ropes. Others brought knives and tasers, duct tape, plastic bags, and power tools. It would be violent, but she was tired of waiting in the dark. She wanted to be out in the open, praised and worshipped, not hidden away like a dirty secret. But this was crossing a line. A creature seeking to survive was one thing, but this was crazy. I wanted to speak out, but I knew the others would silence me. And since I couldn't be influenced, there was only one thing they could do. They would kill me. I had to be careful the night before the planned attack. I joined her in the pool. Only a handful of others were around at the time. She'd grown by then, each segment almost twice as thick as when I'd first seen her, with skin like rubber. I waded out, feeling the water reach my stomach. "You don't agree," she vibrated. I don't. I admit it. I don't want anyone getting hurt. They are improving," she responded. "We are improving. We improve differently," I explained. "You're hurting them." There was a brief pause from every nook and cranny of the room. I saw the other students emerge. Had they been waiting to ambush me? Their eyes looked different, brighter. "Your wish differs from mine," she explained. "We are different." "That's not a bad thing," I said. "That's how we enemy." She said, "There were screams then, anger. Someone grabbing a hammer, another grabbing a saw. A young girl tearing out chunks of her hair, crying with rage. Everett, at the far end of the room, kept slamming his hand against his chest like a gorilla. "Enemy," she repeated. This time, she knocked me down like a bowling pin. There wasn't the usual careful movement. They were quick and erratic, not afraid to wound me. Some people jumped into the pool, ready to tear me to pieces. There was no way out. This was it. Fight or flight. Dozens of twig-like arms grabbed at me, dragging me into the deep end. It was so fast. Forcing my eyes open, all I saw was this gaping, tooth-filled maw coming towards me, teeth moving independent of one another, expelling every breath of air in my lungs. I screamed for it to wait, to listen, to stop, and to think. I pushed all these things I wanted to say into one sound, but it just came out as a scream. I felt the insides of its mouth with my fingertips, trying to hold myself from being swallowed whole. As a tooth brushed against my scalp, I felt it pierce my skin, and then it stopped, much the same way we were affected by her. She was also affected by us. At the taste of my blood, she seemed to understand. She tasted my fear, my depression. Pausing, she released me. I clawed my way to the surface, feeling hot blood pour down my face, forcing air into my lungs. I could see I was surrounded. Even more students and some faculty had gathered around the pool. She rose out of the water. Her body is at least 3 feet longer than when I'd first seen her. The others spoke in unison, not even minding the sea serpent. "I understand," they all said. "I will bargain." I didn't have a choice but to agree. I was given a simple task, and in return, she'd go away. She'd return things to normal. All I had to do was borrow my dad's car and do an errand. It seemed so simple. I was to drive Everett east to the ocean. Nothing else. Just drive Everett. The following day, I got up early. I took my dad's keys, got in the car, and backed out. I made my way across town and picked up Everett. He was sweating bullets, staining the seat. He said nothing and kept his eyes closed. He looked even worse in the morning light. We made our way to Delaware, through Sharpsburg and down to Chesapeake Bay. Everett didn't say a word. By late afternoon, we stepped out on the cold winter beach. Everett took a moment to sit down. I joined him. Neither of us seemed to know what was going to happen next. He shuddered and whimpered, shaking his head. He was scared, I could tell. Then, by the snap of a finger, he turned silent. With newfound determination, he turned to me. "I accept," he said. "Our bargain ends." He pushed his hand against my chest, much like she had done in the pool. He felt my heart. Then he got up, heading straight for the ocean, dropping his clothes along the way. The last thing I saw of Everett was him wading into the ocean, never to be seen again. The segments along his arms were clearer, and his skin had taken on a rubbery texture. He'd been changing. Back at school, people were getting violently ill, throwing up bucket loads of parasites, much like Ron had done in the middle of class. The creature in the pool seemed to have withered and died, leaving only chunks of fossilized flesh behind, resembling nothing but dirt and sandstone, something that easily could have blown in through the damaged pipes. She upheld her part of the bargain, it seemed. I could go on for hours about what happened in the aftermath. For example, the state-sponsored investigation blamed our collective madness on parasites in our drinking water, something related to a small-scale earthquake in Greenbrier Valley. And just as curious, the massive efforts to quiet down the disappearance of Everett. There wasn't even a police report filed. I was grounded, of course. Stealing my dad's car wasn't a popular decision, especially when I couldn't explain to them why years later. I still get news alerts about strange sightings along Chesapeake Bay. Marine life was found shredded. Strange circular wounds on humpback whales. And a couple of months ago, a diver swore he saw a mermaid. There was an interview about it. I'm not going to pretend like I know how they work or how they live, but I can't help but believe that I have made a terrible mistake. To what end, I can only imagine.